Chapter 3640. It was indeed a pity. A bad start could easily leave a psychological shadow that could affect the next round of the competition. It all depended on the students' ability to adjust themselves. The rescuers in front cleaned the student who inhaled the CN tear gas. With the help of the instructor, the other student immediately returned to the forest to complete his rescue. However, there was a serious delay in terms of time. There is a time limit for rescuing people in the poison area. Similarly, there is also a time limit for rescuing people. Once the time limit was exceeded and the rescue person's life was endangered, the participant would lose points. Because Yi Jian raced against time to save the first person who was waiting for rescue, when she and Zhang Minghong returned to the forest again, it gave the Chinese students precious time to find the exit. As a result, the Chinese students were the fastest to pass through the poison zone. Even so, Yi Qian's team was almost overtaken by the West Point students. The West Point students rushed out of the exit with a stretcher and saw Zhang Minghong's figure flashing past the exit. They did not see who it was, but the red on the Chinese student's armband was too eye-catching. When the red entered their eyes, they thought of the scene where a female student from the Chinese team stood beside the truck and waved their national flag when they were running towards the truck. That dazzling red was branded in their minds. They couldn't get rid of it, and it left an unforgettable memory. Therefore, although they didn't see clearly who it was, the red let the West Point students know who was the first one to come out. Zhang Minghong found the West Point students first. He rushed in and ran side by side with Yi Qian. Due to the breathing mask, he said in a low voice, "I just saw the West Point students. They took about the same time as us. If we don't hurry, we will be overtaken by the West Point students at any time." Because Zhang Minghong also found the West Point students, he instantly felt a sense of urgency. Since they were the first to rescue the first person, they had to be the first to succeed. In this kind of situation, they had to fight for the first place. There was no doubt about it. Let's hurry. As long as we are faster than them, we will be faster too. Yi Qian ran through the maze-like forest. Soon, he and Zhang Minghong met up with Jiang Yang and Tianqin's team. With Zhang Minghong escorting him out, Yi Qian continued to search for and guide the next group of students away from the poison site. The Chinese students did not have any problems wearing protective equipment. When they retreated, even if their movements were too violent, they would not be affected by the tear gas. They cooperated with each other in a very disciplined manner and successfully rescued all 8 people who needed medical attention. The head instructor, who was waiting outside, pressed the timer. At the same time, the statistics staff received the time from the Chinese side. Through the cameras set up on the trees and the exit, they could see the cooperation between the Chinese students. This kind of cooperation was not done through orders. Instead, when one student wanted to do something, the other student would naturally do it. Seeing Monfei, the military personnel couldn't help but nod as they watched. Not bad. Their cooperation is very good. All the steps and movements are professional and rigorous. There is no pause or hesitation. This means that they know very well what they should do. Their division of labor is very clear. They have truly achieved cooperation. After the chief instructor saw the Chinese personnel's cooperation in handling the accident, he gave them a very high evaluation. Chapter 3641. The voice of the Monfei military staff came from the walkie-talkies carried by the instructors. They told the instructors of each country who won first place in the rescue of the poison zone. When they said that it was the Chinese student, there was a few seconds of silence in the area where the instructors were. It was so quiet that the air seemed to stop flowing. Time froze at this moment, and not a single sound came out. There was a buzzing sound. Li Jinyan lowered the volume of the walkie-talkie and replied to the Monfei military chief instructor and the referee. China received. It was a very short reply, just like his personality, crisp and direct. There was a round of applause. Some were sincerely happy for the Chinese team's results, while some were secretly surging under the applause. Although the instructor from Korea had clapped hands with the instructors from other countries, his expression had long betrayed his inner thoughts. The smile that was originally still hanging at the corner of his mouth stiffened, and the gaze he looked at them with was somewhat cold. The Chinese student, who he thought least highly of, won first place. The Chinese student was really lucky. As for the level of strength, instructor Jin Zhongzai did not admit that the Chinese student was stronger than the Korean student. He could only think that the Chinese student was luckier than the Korean student, which was in line with their current understanding of the Chinese team. The Japanese instructor clenched the walkie-talkie in his hand slightly, and his eyes were full of darkness. It turned out that the Chinese team won first place in the rescue of the poison zone. He had always thought that the first place would be one of the few world-famous military schools. When did the Chinese military school become so powerful? The military school students they trained were so powerful that they defeated the powerful Western countries in the first competition and won first place directly. Next, he needed to focus on observing the Chinese student. He must focus on observing. After returning to China, the Joint Staff School still needed to conduct a research on the Chinese military school and the Chinese students. While learning from the Western countries, they could not forget to study the Asian countries. The Japanese instructor, who was the opposite of the Korean instructor, acknowledged the strength of the Chinese team. Therefore, his vigilance in his heart was raised to another level. Li Jinyan, who was receiving the applause and congratulations, stood calmly in front of most of the instructors from various countries who were older than him. He was still indifferent and cold. His pure black eyes slightly swept across the foreign faces, and his eyelids slightly lowered a little, politely thanking the instructors of various countries for their congratulations. There was no modesty or politeness. Everything was calm and indifferent, and he did not give the instructors a chance to see through him. The Chinese instructor was elegant, polite, and very mysterious. This was the impression that more than half of the instructors had of Li Jinyan from the beginning to the end of the competition. Yi Qian and the others were also thanking the students from other countries for their congratulations. Every Chinese student was polite and courteous. Although they were easygoing, their military might was not to be underestimated. No matter how ugly the expressions of the Korean students were, they did not say anything overboard. Although they questioned the results of the Chinese students in the poison zone, no one dared to say it, nor did they have the right to say it. Although they came out at just the right time, there were already several countries in front of them. We will definitely surpass them in the next match. Lu Enna glared fiercely at Tianqin. She took off all her protective gear and swore to the students of her country in a low voice, "I must defeat that Tianqin. I must defeat her." Chapter 3642. The Korean student, Lu Enna, had always thought that Tianqin, who could understand what they were saying, was the best female student on the Chinese team. As for Yi Qian, who only spoke among her own team members, she did not take her seriously at all. Yi Qian had always been a reticent person in front of the other students. She would only say a few words when she absolutely had to. After that, she would immediately choose to remain silent and quietly watch from the side, leaving the communication to the other Chinese students. As a result, she left the impression that she was quiet and reserved. This type of person was often the easiest to overlook. Yi Qian, who was not used to taking the initiative to walk in front of the public, also did not want to be remembered by too many people. In the previous competition, she had painted her face from the beginning to a certain extent to conceal her appearance. But this time, the students were clean before the competition and only painted their faces after the oath. Everyone had a deep impression of each other's appearance, so Yi Qian did not want to be noticed. Captain Xia had once told her that she should try not to leave a deep impression in certain situations if she could. After all, their identities were different. In response, when she saw Lu Enna looking at Tianqin, Yi Qian said in a low voice, "Keep an eye on Lu Enna. She has made you an important target." Hearing this, Tianqin immediately said, "Is she a little short-sighted? She actually made her an important target? What about Yi Qian?" Could it be that Lu Enna thought that Yi Qian was the weakest among all the Chinese students? Being short-sighted is a good thing. You should bear with it. Yi Qian, who was arranging her protective gear, pursed her lips and smiled. "You cover for me. We'll do a cover-up." Yi Qian was low-key. This was Tianqin's first impression of her. She was obviously very strong, but she was so low-key that if one did not interact with her, they would not be able to tell how strong she was. Instead, they would misunderstand her because of her beautiful appearance, thinking that she was just a girl with outstanding looks. But Luina really had a problem with her judgment. How could she be weak if she could represent her country and school in an overseas competition? Luina was the only one who thought so. Li Shanli, who kept glancing at Yi Qian, lowered her head and whispered something to a male student from her country. Yi Qian did not know what she said, but the male student glanced at Yi Qian a few times with a dark gaze. Then, he nodded, as if indicating that he knew something. The students from each country put away their protective equipment and entered the next round of the log carrying competition. Soon, the additional round was out. Originally, there was a single person carrying a log, but now there was a team carrying a log. After the competition, there was another battlefield rescue competition. 2 additional matches were added in one day. When the instructors of each country received the documents of the rules of the competition, they all frowned slightly. They didn't know if it would affect the competition on the second day, with so much physical exhaustion on the first day. Li Jinyan took a look at the rules of the 2 additional matches. He was still very confident in Yi Qian. During the days of joint training, he and Xia Jinyuan had pushed themselves and their comrades to the brink of death. He was not worried about Yi Qian in the additional matches, but he couldn't help but be a little worried about the other students. Carrying a log for 3 kilometers alone and then immediately carrying a log for a team to climb a mountain. These 2 events were both very physically taxing. At this point, it would depend on how strong the students' endurance training was. Ordinary excellence was not enough. They had to be strong. When the students from each country found out about the additional matches, their expressions inevitably changed. After Yi Qian read the rules, he smiled and said, "At least we don't have to carry logs to find a way out. There's a ready-made path for us to walk on. When the time comes, we can all help each other." Chapter 3643. No matter how difficult the competition was going to be, or how much energy they had to expend, these were not things that the students from each country could accurately calculate. The only thing they could do was to complete the competition and achieve good results. The poison zone meant that their mental state was unprecedentedly tense, and carrying the logs required the accumulation and explosive power of their entire body. The logs were all solid logs, and the wood was quite hard. Each log weighed 15 kilograms, and they were placed neatly one by one. The students stood next to the logs they had to carry, waiting for the whistle to sound. Everything was ready. Hundreds of students from each country focused their energy and looked straight ahead with determination. Their young faces still looked a little immature, but they were all calm and had no intention of backing down. These were the current generation of soldiers from each country. Even if they often offended the students from other countries, they were still the best students in the eyes of their own country's instructors. Li Jinyan held up the binoculars with both hands. His tall figure and calm appearance always attracted some people's attention. He didn't like to talk, but that didn't mean he didn't have a strong presence. Even if he didn't like to talk, his presence was still very strong. His aura that didn't lose out to others earned him some respect. Moreover, the good performance of the Chinese students increased the amount of respect they had for him. He quietly watched the Chinese students without saying a word. The other instructors standing next to him seemed to be thirsty to the point that their throats were itchy. After a few coughs of varying pitch, they slowly withdrew their gazes from the Chinese instructors and similarly raised their binoculars to observe their own students. When the whistle sounded, all the students stood up the round logs that were lying flat on the ground. Then they bent their backs and pulled the long riveted handles on the left and right sides of the round logs. In a short period of time, they lifted the 15 kilograms solid round logs onto their shoulders without anyone's help. They could only rely on themselves. It was easier for the boys, but the girls were at a disadvantage. It was difficult for the weaker ones to lift it in one go. Tianqin was a little strained. She was a pilot, and although the physical requirements were high, she didn't have daily physical training like the army. Her physical training was all related to flying. Just as she lifted the log for the first time, the weight of the log made her lose her balance. Suddenly, The log, which was leaning to the left, was lifted steadily. She didn't have time to turn her head to thank Yi Qian, who was standing on her left. She quickly used Yi Qian's strength to lift the log with her right hand. Finally, she was able to lift the unbalanced log on her shoulder. Run! What her left ear heard Yi Qian's clear and steady voice penetrating through her ears, Tianqi nodded slightly. She picked up the log and began to run 3,000 meters. The 3,000-meter log run was a sloping run. The entire running field was a small hill with uneven ground. Running to the top of the hill and back to the starting point was a round trip of 3,000 meters. As they climbed, the temperature gradually rose. It was not easy to run with a 15-kilogram log on their shoulders, but the U.S. Navy Academy was used to it. The log-carrying training originated from the United States Marine Corps. Its purpose was to improve physical fitness, train teamwork, and individual perseverance. The students of the United States Marine Corps Academy treated the log-carrying training as a school tradition. It was a physical training that every student had to go through. Therefore, after years of training, they were naturally stronger than students from other countries. Chapter 3644. The students from a U.S. Naval Academy had imperceptibly increased the pressure on the students from other countries. Although they only sent 4 students as representatives, they cooperated well with the West Point students. Under the leadership of the U.S. Naval Academy students, a group of 16 people maintained the same speed throughout the race. There was no situation where one student had already run to the front and the last student had a long way to go. The tactics used by the American students complemented each other. Most of the students from other countries used the strategy of having the strong lead and the weak follow closely behind. The result of using this strategy was that the strongest would be far ahead while the weakest would be far behind. The gap of a few hundred meters was fine because they still had the stamina to catch up. But when it came to climbing hills, the disadvantage of this strategy was that the students at the back could not see their own students at all. Jiang Yang saw a female student from an Eastern European country almost fall several times while carrying a log. Then he looked at the speed and coordination of the Chinese students. He said to his comrade beside him, "Fortunately, we listened to Yi Qian's strategy and did not let the stronger students run to the front. Otherwise, we would have the same problem as the other countries." Huff, huff, huff. Shirluji, who was running rhythmically, nodded. His breathing was slightly rapid as he replied, "That's right. Yi Qian's strategy is very useful. We just have to listen to her instructions in the upcoming competition." On the other side of Shirluji was a student from the Naval Academy. Hearing this, he panted and said, "I finally understand why Instructor Li always asks Yi Qian if she has any better ideas. She is much more reliable than we are. More than reliable. Sometimes, she can even make decisions. I really admire her. She is the female student I admire the most." Shirlu instructed the student to take deep breaths to adjust his rapid breathing rate. He raised his head and looked at the slender figure running in front of him in a group of 8. Tears seeped into his reddened eyes, and there was a deep admiration in his eyes. She was capable of both literature and martial arts, and was intelligent and resourceful. After the competition, he had to keep in touch with her. Jiang Yang thought of what happened during the Spring Festival. When Yi Qian killed someone, he was so scared that his limbs went weak. At that time, Yi Qian was unbelievably calm. Li Xiang secretly said to him, "When Yi Qian killed the target, I kept feeling that it was not her first time. She was too decisive." Li Xiang thought so, and so did he. After spending a few days with Yi Qian, he felt that Yi Qian was very mysterious. He didn't seem like a second-year student at all. He could tell from Instructor Li's attitude. Although they were brother and sister, Instructor Li did not give special treatment to Yi Qian because of this. He treated everyone equally. However, Instructor Li would always ask for Yi Qian's suggestions when it came to making decisions and strategies. Then, Yi Qian would often be able to bring up important points that the other students did not mention. Yi Qian might really not be an ordinary student. He's only a sophomore. They were all third-year and fourth-year students. Some of them had been sent to the grassroots level and had participated in many competitions. Some of them had even participated in actual combat exercises before. As for Yi Qian, they would only start to study at a deeper level this semester. Later, when the 3 male students were escorted out of the harbor by her, Yi Qian was in charge of the entire operation. At that time, they all listened to Yi Qian's instructions. That meant that they all subconsciously believed that they should listen to Yi Qian's instructions at this moment. Why should they listen to him? Because Yi Qian was more experienced and stronger than them. Chapter 36:45. Jiang Yang, who was running while carrying the log, suddenly tensed up. Why did they listen to Yi Qian's plan? Because Yi Qian had more experience than them? More experience than them? That's not right. During the spring festival, Yi Qian hadn't even officially entered the second semester of his second year. Where did his experience come from? She was able to make these third-year and fourth-year students trust her so much. For some reason, they trusted her. Just like when they were discussing the strategy of carrying the logs, their eyes fell on Yi Qian first, and then they waited for her to speak. At that time, Yi Qian was a little embarrassed and lowered his head. Li Xiang suddenly had the urge to have a good chat with Yi Qian. Suddenly, he heard Shi Luji's voice. Li Xiang, it's time to speed up. Li Xiang was distracted for a moment. Fortunately, Shi Luji reminded him. Li Xiang snapped back to reality. Before his brain could react, he had already started running with his teammates. Tianqin had Yi Qian to carry her. Although there was a gap in physical strength, with Yi Qian and other teammates around, the 8 of them could run together. No matter how tired they were, they could grit their teeth and continue running. Don't rush. The main thing is to stabilize your breathing. Don't let your steps grow and shrink. Maintain your current pace and adjust your breathing. Run with us. Yi Qian took care of Tianqin very carefully. This was not an individual competition, but a team competition. If the team took care of each other well, it would be more beneficial to score. If the team only relied on individual running, the team score would be relatively low. Even if the individual scored high, it would not be able to make up for it, because the competition rules specifically mention team work. Tianqi nodded. She could not run and speak fluently at the same time, like Yi Qian. She could only make an M sound to show that she understood. Good luck, Tianqi. On the other side of her were students from the Air Force Academy. Yi Qian purposely arranged this in hopes that the students from the Air Force Academy would encourage Tianqin. The starting speed of the Chinese team was not the fastest. Therefore, after running for 500 meters, they were still in the middle position. The ones who were most familiar with the front were the students from Korea and Japan. The students from the 2 countries exerted their strength as they ran and rushed in front of the students from the other Asian countries. But now, the Chinese team had sped up. The students from the Asian countries in front of them were the targets they needed to surpass. The cadets were distributed according to the continents. The countries of Asia, Europe, and North America were all part of a plate. Only 3 continents had sent their own cadets, and the 3 plates were separated. It was no wonder that Japan and Korea wanted to surpass the Chinese cadets. The American students from North America put a lot of pressure on the Canadian and Mexican students, so much so that the first 1,500 meters of the race was very exhausting for the student from these 2 countries. There were more European countries participating, and the strongest was Eastern Europe's Russia, followed by Western Europe's England, France, and Central Europe's France. The strength of the student from these 4 countries was about the same, but because of tactical reasons, the student from Fu Longji Military Academy led the students from their own military academies to run ahead of the Western European countries. Soon, they heard a commotion coming from the students of the Asian countries. Some of the students who were carrying logs turned their bodies slightly and looked over. They saw that there were 2 groups of students who suddenly exerted their strength and overtook dozens of students. Chapter 36:46. The Korean students who were running in front heard the commotion behind them. Luina, who was lagging behind, panted heavily. When she heard the commotion, she couldn't help but turn around to see what was going on. Luina's pupils shrank when she saw the commotion. She immediately turned around with the log on her shoulder and tried to increase her speed to catch up with the students from her own country. The Chinese students who were lagging behind suddenly sped up. They were very, very fast. She turned around and saw that they had overtaken several students from other countries. How could this be? How could the Chinese students still have so much energy to increase their speed? She looked at herself. She wanted to increase her speed, but the log on her shoulder seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. It was so heavy that it was difficult for her to move. She wanted to charge forward and tell her country's students that the Chinese students had caught up. However, she couldn't increase her speed at all. In fact, it was already good enough that she could maintain her current speed. The Japanese students who had also heard the commotion did not turn around like Luana to check the situation behind them. They silently prayed for their country's loyalty to them and ran towards the transit point. Don't look back. The transit point in front of us is our target. When we reach the transit point, we can turn around and see more clearly. Fujishima Maki, who was leading the team, reminded his country's students. How could they turn around at this time? With the log on their shoulders, they had to turn around if they wanted to see more clearly. Turning around would be a waste of time, and they couldn't afford to waste time. As long as they reached the transit point first and turn around, they would be able to see that many countries' students had been defeated by them. When they turn around, they would be the victors. Countless hey sound could be heard. The Japanese students, who had always been strict with themselves, followed closely behind the male students, even though their shoulders were already red from the weight of the log. The log was too heavy. It was so heavy that it seemed like it would press their legs into the ground after a while. After 1,000 meters, more and more students began to fall behind. More and more students began to walk to persevere. The transit point was set on the top of the hill. The last 500 meters was a 45-degree slope. With the weight of the log, it was extremely difficult to even walk, let alone run. The Japanese students, who were determined to suppress the Asian students, had no choice but to slow down. The two girls were completely behind the boys. Their backs were bent, and they could only walk to the transfer point. Among the scattered lines, the instructors who were using binoculars to observe the situation saw that there were two groups of students who were always in a horizontal line. They were very conspicuous, so conspicuous that many of the instructors couldn't help but use binoculars to observe. They saw that the two groups of students who were originally in the middle were overtaking more and more students. They quickly ran from the middle to the front and didn't stop. They were still rushing forward. It wasn't until the two groups of students left dozens of students from other countries that they slowed down. They must be Chinese students. The red on their armbands is very eye-catching. It should be them. The Chinese students have a very high sense of teamwork. It can be seen from their experience in the Red Belt that this is higher than many countries. Looks like the Chinese students will have even more exciting performances in this military academy competition. They are very strong. It showed us the strength of China's rising military power. Chapter 36:47. The instructors from a few Asian countries stood together, lowered their binoculars, and began to discuss in low voices. The Chinese students were the focus of their discussion. First, they listed out the shortcomings of their own students, then surrounded the Chinese students and discussed in low voices. Japan and Korea belong to Asia, so the instructors from these two countries were naturally present. Hearing the instructors from several other Asian countries talking about the Chinese students, they kept nodding and praising them. The Japanese instructor, who had put down his binoculars, picked them up again to observe the Chinese students. With this observation, his brows furrowed tightly. It was as if a cold wind had suddenly rushed into his heart on a sunny day. It was so cold that his heart tightened, and his jaw immediately tensed up. He saw that the Chinese students had slowed down again, but the formation of the two groups was still the same. He counted carefully, and there were still 8 people in each group. That was to say, when they were fast, the Chinese students were running together, and when they were slow, they were also slowing down together. It was a bit like scanning through the binoculars and spotting the American team. The American students, who were about to reach the transfer point, were carrying the same logs as the Chinese students. When they were slow, they slowed down together, and when they were fast, they sped up together. Now, they were about to reach another transfer point together. At this moment, the Japanese instructor held the binoculars so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Among all the participating teams, only the Chinese and American students were moving horizontally. No one was left behind. They were all moving forward and retreating together. Teamwork, the Japanese instructor said in a low voice. He instantly understood where the students from China and the United States were focusing on. It was not individual points, it was team points. The instructor from South Korea was influenced by the language of the instructors from other countries. While he was holding his breath, he kept holding up his binoculars, hoping that his country's students could speed up a little and widen the distance between them and the Chinese team. Unfortunately, the students from their country were scattered all over the place. Even if he wanted to find all the students from his country, he would not be able to do so in such a short time. Through the binoculars, he only locked onto the 5 male students in front of the group. The rest of the students were struggling to carry logs in 2s and 3s. When he saw the last female student, Luina, Jin Zhong's hands trembled. Luina had already fallen behind the Chinese team. Run faster, you still need to run, you can't stop. You can't rest, you can't walk. In the depths of his heart, Jin Zhong roared at the instructor, but unfortunately, Luina couldn't hear it. The American students had already run to their transfer point and received their country's American flag from the waiting instructor. The sudden cheers made the students running behind look over. They saw the American flag fluttering in the wind under the sun, and the cheers of the American students were ringing in their ears. They began to return. He returned with his country's flag. Following Yi Jian's order, the Chinese students once again sprinted for the 100-meter sprint. They had adjusted their breathing and physical strength during the 200-meter sprint. Now, all they had to do was to rush to the transition point and receive their country's national flag from the instructor. Charge! After the short but powerful order was given, the 2 groups of students simultaneously sprinted towards the transfer point. Li Jingyan, who was holding the binoculars with one hand, tightened his grip. At this moment, he was not as calm as he appeared to be. Chapter 36:48. They had reached the first crucial point. They had to overtake the Korean students. The Japanese students could overtake them at any time. As for the sarcastic remarks made by the Korean instructors, they did not need to use words to refute them. They could only use their strength to refute them. The power of the sun grew stronger and stronger, and the training uniform was already drenched in sweat. Beads of sweat the size of beans slowly slid down from the hair and dripped into the eyes, piercing the eyes and causing waves of pain. It seeped into the mouth and then dripped down from the chin, flying into the grass with each step. More and more sweat flowed down, and the distance was getting closer and closer. Li Xiang saw the Korean students in front of him and thought of the sarcastic remarks made by them. His eyes moved slightly, and he shouted, "Brothers, let's go." He was panting when he reached his limit. His voice was hoarse. However, he still managed to achieve the effect he wanted. When the Korean students heard the voice behind them, they clenched their fists and ran forward with all their might. Their shoulders were aching from the friction of the heavy logs. The Korean students who heard Li Xiang shout knew that he was from the Chinese team. They had caught up and would overtake them at any time. Charge! Zhang Minghong gave the command. Following that, the Chinese students sped up again. The grass was trampled by their military boots, and large patches of grass were toppled. Some of the thick grass even had deep shoe prints on them. They closed in on them step by step and gradually overtook them. The hot wind blew past their faces, bringing with it the smell of grass and trees. The Chinese team maintained their speed and overtook the Korean team at the front. When the panting Tianqin rushed past a male student from Korea, she glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. She saw the other party's stifled expression, and she couldn't help but feel a burst of joy in her heart. Delightful, delightful, too delightful. Ha ha ha. Mocking the Chinese team? She really did not know where they got their confidence and arrogance from. They still want to overtake the Chinese team? Dream on. For the sake of pride, she would not allow the Korean team to overtake her. Chase after the Japanese and get their flag. Yi Qian ignored the Korean team's glare. This was how the competition was. Did they think that the Chinese team would go easy on the Korean team? In their dreams. Zhang Minghong glanced at Tianqin. Before the third sprint, he panted and asked Tianqin, "Can you complete one more sprint and show them what you've got?" Who are they? All the Chinese students were well aware of this. When the Korean students who were left behind saw that all the Chinese students had surpassed them, the frustration in their hearts grew bigger and bigger like a snowball, so much so that their expressions became distorted. Don't be discouraged. Keep your spirits up. There are still many matches to come. The male student leading the team saw that his comrade had been affected by the Chinese side. He slowed down, and his breathing became erratic. With a cold look in his eyes, he reminded him in a low voice, "Do you want to lose all the remaining matches?" Who wants to lose? They did not want to lose at all. But now, because the Chinese side, which they looked down on, had won twice in a row, they were furious. There's still 1,500 meters to go. It's hard to say who will win or lose. The leading male student reminded them again, which calmed down the students who were a lot more confused. Luina could only watch helplessly as all the Chinese students overtook her own country. Her eyes were red from sweat and burning with rage. It's them again. It's them again. Why is it them again? Chapter 36:49. Luina was furious. She couldn't stand the fact that a student from a country she looked down on had surpassed her own. She was furious, and she couldn't accept it. She didn't believe that a military school student from a poor country could be so powerful. In a country where even food, shelter, and transportation were poor, how good could their military school students be? She refused to believe it. Luina was determined to compete with the Chinese students. She carried the log with difficulty and used all the strength in her body to chase after the Chinese students. In front of them, the Japanese students heard the footsteps behind them. All the students' faces became more and more serious. They were very close. If they didn't sprint, they would be overtaken by the Chinese students. Li Jinyan loosened his clenched fists. There was a faint smile on his thin lips that no one could see. Yi Qian led the students to overtake the Japanese. 50 meters, 40 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters, 10 meters. Soon, the Japanese students had overtaken two students. 9, 8, 7, 6, 4. They had successfully overtaken them. The Japanese students lost in the 45-degree slope sprint. They watched the instructor hand the Chinese students a bright red flag that made their pupils shrink. With the help of the instructor, the red flag was inserted on their shoulder straps. The wind blew the bright red flag, and all the Chinese students looked up. They could not free their hands to salute the flag, so they could only salute with the most solemn eyes. At that moment, the Japanese students felt their hearts skip a beat because of the solemn gazes of the Chinese students. They only wanted to defeat the Asian countries, but they didn't think about whether the Chinese students would defeat the Asian countries, especially them. Their countries had a feud with the Chinese students, so the Chinese students must want to defeat them the most. They had successfully overtaken the Japanese by 4 meters. Li Jinyan heard the Japanese instructor, Hirano Ling, sigh. He sighed because his country's students had been overtaken by the Chinese students. Suddenly, Hirano Ridge of Japan thought of a book called The Long Battle, the Korean War in the Eyes of the Americans. In the book, there was a passage that the Allied soldiers were most afraid of hearing the sound of the China Volunteer Army's charge bugle call. When I heard the sound of the bugle call, I felt that this was clearly a Chinese funeral. When I heard the bugle call, I felt that this was clearly a Chinese funeral. I heard the bugle call to charge, and I felt the fearless spirit of the Chinese soldiers. And now, in the young Chinese students, he saw a spirit of bravery that even the Allied soldiers were afraid of. The instructor from Flatfield Ridge slowly retracted his gaze. Finally, he looked at the young Chinese soldier who was leading the young military academy students overseas for the competition. His eyes were solemn. The young officers were leading the young cadets. It could be seen that the young Chinese had really risen. After a long war of aggression and a long period of turmoil, this country with a history of 5,000 years had stood up again and again like a giant, holding up the sky and earth of their country. There was no sign of defeat at all. The red flag in the instructor's hand was handed to the Chinese students. The red flag was not big, but the color was still so red and so dazzling. Yi Qian tried hard to turn her head and look at the red flag on her shoulder strap. She couldn't see everything. She could only vaguely see a touch of red sweep past the corner of her eyes. Chapter 3650. That flash of red was the faith of all the Chinese soldiers. Their loyalty would never change, and they would protect their faith with their loyal souls. Li Jinyan watched as the young students won the national flag again. As a soldier, he stared intently at the national flag that was getting closer and closer to him. His back straightened, and his military posture seemed even colder and more inviolable. When the 5 stars on the red flag were clearly reflected in his eyes, Li Jinyan raised his arm with a swish and saluted the flag as though it had been split open by the wind. Their students did not disappoint the country and won once again. In the individual log carrying competition, the Chinese team came in 3rd place, and the Chinese individual scores added together came in 5th place. Overall, they came in 3rd place. They had left the 2 world-famous students of the Western Military Academy far behind. At this moment, the Chinese students' faces were overflowing with smiles. They had not even wiped off their sweat when they looked at the young instructor who had been silently watching them. Even from a distance, they could feel the gratification in the instructor's eyes. The students did not have time to rest. Next up was the log-carrying competition. It was not about sitting in the mud and lying on their backs while carrying logs. Instead, it was a competition where they carried logs and ran across different terrains. This time, the logs in their hands could be lifted off the ground because the obstacles they had to cross were deep pits and logs that had to be crossed in succession. It was still 8 people in a team. This time, Tianqin and Yi Qian were separated. Each team had a female student, so that their strength would be evenly distributed. Lift in place, sprint back, carry together, pass obstacles. Yi Qian came up with a strategy for the short assembly. She had already memorized all the rules of the competition. The 16 of them formed a large circle. In the circle, Yi Qian said in a low voice, "This is an additional round, so the rules are simpler. After passing the 2 obstacles, it's time to run. This time, don't wait. Whichever team passes the obstacle first starts sprinting immediately." The Chinese students listened to her arrangements and nodded lightly in agreement. Listening to Yi Qian's arrangements was definitely the right thing to do. This time, Yi Qian did not make any detailed arrangements. Before the 5-minute meeting time was up, she had already finished the discussion. Everyone held hands and gently swung their arms to relax their tired and aching shoulders from running while carrying the logs. Yi Qian, who still had time to gather, said in a low voice, "The more people look down on us, the more we have to fight for our pride. No matter how tired or painful it is, just think about how confident the Japanese women are that they think they can beat us, and think about how the Korean students look down on us. Just thinking about it is unbearable. We don't want to argue with them. We'll just make them shut up during the competition." Yi Qian kept in mind the frivolous treatment of the Korean students and the natural treatment of the Japanese students. He was prepared to strike back at any time during the competition. Tianqin could not help but laugh when she saw this. Luana was really blind. Just now, the person she was glaring at was him and not Yi Qian. He wondered if she was really short-sighted. She did not even understand the real, ruthless characters. He really did not understand why she was glaring at him. The Korean and Japanese teams were very different. They were afraid that they would lose to the Chinese team again, so they used every minute and second to arrange and deploy their teams. They wanted to win against the Chinese team in the additional round. They did not want to lose to the Chinese team again. That would really embarrass them. Chapter 3651. However, they were soon hit by reality. The Chinese students did not give them a chance to overtake them. After lifting 20 meters on the spot, the Chinese students had already started sprinting back and forth. Then, they coordinated with each other to pass the obstacle. The Chinese students seemed to have done it all in one breath. There was no pause in the middle. With the special forces in the middle, They were like an unshakable, stabilizing needle. After the morning competition ended, the total score was immediately announced. The Chinese team was still in third place. As for Japan and Korea, who were determined to beat the Chinese team, they were directly ranked in the top 5. Fortunately, they were not in the top 10. When the scores came out, the instructors from the various countries were already standing with their own students. Li Jinyan reached out his hand and felt countless pairs of hands stacked on top of the back of his hand. There were too many people, so he couldn't stack them one by one. Thus, he decided to stack them in groups of 8, then happily toss them aside and put them down. There were 2 big matches in the morning on the first day. The Chinese team won the first match beautifully. The foreign students who were ranked behind were not discouraged. Under the guidance of the instructors, they readjusted their mentality and rested well to prepare for the afternoon competition. The Korean instructor, Kim Jong-zai, saw that their students were not looking good because they lost to the Chinese team. He swallowed the words of criticism that were about to come out of his mouth. He could only comfort them first so that it would not affect the following matches. You have seen the strength of the Chinese team. They sent their best students to participate, but we did not. Therefore, it is not surprising that you lost to the Chinese team. They sent their best students, and yet they were unable to get first place. This shows that their overall strength is still very weak. The strong ones are only the few that they saw. I'm also at fault for not reminding us seriously when we lost this morning. In the afternoon competition, everyone must treat the Chinese students seriously. Do not underestimate them because they are from China. If they did not seize the time to warn their own students, they would not have time to do so when the obstacle course started at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The Japanese instructor, Hirano Ryu, said something to the Chinese students. They walked away and nodded as if they were afraid that others would overhear them. They seemed to be discussing something important again. On the Chinese side, there were already students from other countries who came to congratulate them. They shook hands with the American students who won first place and started a short conversation. The American students did not have any hostility. They truly regarded the Chinese students as opponents. There was no contempt in their words and no invisible arrogance. When they congratulated them, their expressions were very sincere. The Chinese students learned a lot from chatting with them. Li Jinyan was also talking to the American instructor in a low voice. Beside him were the instructors from the top 5 countries. Everyone was talking about the training that had started in the morning. No one looked down on the Chinese students anymore, and no country thought that the Chinese students were weak. Even the Malaysian military did not dare to do so. Their president even personally sent a telegram to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs to express his deep apologies for the omission of the invitation letter. The afternoon match officially began at 1 o'clock. Li Jinyan only had one simple request for the students, which was to stabilize their position in the top 3. If they were to advance one more place, they would be happy. If they were to fall one more place, they would need to reflect on themselves. Fortunately, the students did not let them down, especially when they were drawn to finish the steeplechase with the Japanese students. The Chinese students, who had rested well, were in high spirits. They looked at the Japanese students with bright eyes, which made the other side panic. Chapter 3652. Li Jinyan had never asked the students to achieve any kind of results, which gave the students the illusion that he did not care about results. They had even privately discussed in whispers whether Instructor Li did not have much confidence in them and did not even ask for results. Today, Li Jinyan suddenly asked them to pass the top 5 and try their best to stay in third place. The students instantly understood why Li Jinyan had not asked for their results before. He had waited until the competition this morning to see the strength of the students from each country before making the request. It was not that he did not want to mention it, but that he needed to examine it. Li Jinyan did not even need to spell it out. The students already knew what he was thinking. That was why Li Jinyan said that the students' minds were so sharp that it surprised him. They were smart and resourceful and could be molded. With their goals set, the Chinese students began to work hard to secure a spot in third place. Since their instructor had said that they would be in the top 5, it meant that it would be difficult to secure a spot in the top 3. The students from the world-renowned military academies were not to be trifled with. especially since they were still at the back. Once they put in more effort, it was not impossible for them to overtake the Chinese. However, no matter how difficult the following competition was, they would do their best to secure a spot in the top 3. The afternoon obstacle course began at the hottest time. The whistle had not yet sounded, and the atmosphere in the arena was particularly tense. The air seemed to have been injected with lead, and the atmosphere was so heavy that there was not much of a smile on the students' faces. Yi Qian raised her arm. She unconsciously made a gesture that Xia Jinyuan would do every time before he went on a mission. She gently kissed the national flag on her armband. This was the belief that she shared with him. The whistle sounded, and the students from each country galloped on the arena. This was a competition without an audience, and also a battlefield without smoke. The students from each country were fighting for the glory of their country, sweating to their heart's content, and using their own strength to surpass their opponents. The Chinese students, who had even been left out of their invitations by Monfei, had been holding back from the beginning. Now that they had the opportunity, how could they miss it? They had come bearing the glory of their country, and they had to fight. They're too fast. There is no way to overtake them. That female student, the one who doesn't understand our Korean language, she is the best student on the Chinese side. She has surpassed many people. Faster. Don't let the Chinese students overtake us too much. In the team steeplechase relay race, Yi Qian was the fastest out of all the female students. She was the first one to carry a box full of ammunition through the barbed wire fence. Then, she half-squatted outside to provide support for her teammates. When she climbed over the high wall, her body was as light as a swallow. She really did look like a bird as she leaped up the high wall to provide support for her teammates. When it was time to climb the iron rope, 2 out of the 5 countries that were climbing the iron rope with her fell into the muddy puddle below. The intense physical exertion in the morning had taken a toll on the shoulders of many students. Even after a short rest, it was still painful. When it came to climbing the iron chain, their entire bodies were suspended in the air. They had to rely on their own arm strength to support their entire body. Naturally, those who were physically exhausted would fall down. The Chinese student, Tian Qin, also fell once. She had to climb up again to pass. Her situation was not bad. She only fell once. Some students from other countries fell several times and lost all their points in the end. Most of the female students lost points in this competition. There were male students as well, but not many of them. Chapter 3653. If the cooperation between the Chinese students in the morning competition had left a deep impression on the instructors and the Monfei military, then the Chinese student Yi Qian in the team steeplechase relay race in the afternoon was definitely like a rising star. He was so dazzling that people couldn't take their eyes off him. Until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when the steeplechase relay race ended, there were still many people looking at Yi Qian. His performance was so wonderful. Even when competing with students from Western countries, he had an absolute advantage over the other side. He had demonstrated the strength of a soldier from a great country in every way. From 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, the Chinese team used 4 hours to maintain the ranking of the first day. They still held the top 3 positions, not letting the Western countries surpass them in the top 4 and top 5. When the Asian students saw Yi Qian finish the 800-meter steeplechase, they couldn't help but rub their faces. His time was 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He was firmly in first place. Even the Western students couldn't surpass him. In this regard, Li Jinyan thought he was doing well. In the face of the congratulations from the Monfei military, he was still as calm as a breeze and as calm as a lake. The instructors who were talking to him in a low voice couldn't figure out what he was thinking at all. The more he was like this, the more people didn't dare to look down on him. The instructors had already received news of the camping competition tonight. In other words, it could be called escape from death. The Monfei military would send soldiers to ambush the students of each country. The students of each country would be divided into 2 opposing sides. One side would surround the other, and the other side would have to break out of the encirclement. If the other side couldn't break out of the encirclement, they would lose. If the other side broke out of the encirclement, they would lose. The opponents would be randomly assigned by the computer. Once the two sides were assigned, there was no possibility of changing them. This time, there was no division between Asia, North America, or Europe. All the teams were randomly assigned. Kim Jong-il from Korea narrowed his eyes when he saw the opposing country on the instructor's computer screen. The Korean students were up against the Chinese students. When the instructor standing behind him saw the two national flags on the computer screen, he sighed softly in his heart. To be honest, they would rather compete with the Western students than the Chinese students. This was because they would feel embarrassed and their faces would burn. They would even subconsciously avoid looking at Instructor Fong. The instructor from Singapore looked at the Korean instructor sympathetically. In the end, because the Korean instructor stood in front of the computer for a long time and did not leave, the instructor from Singapore said in a low voice, "If you have any questions, you can ask Monfei Military." Questions? Instructor Jin Jong, who was standing beside the computer, pondered for a moment when he heard this. Then, he said in a low voice, "Can I raise a question and reapply?" "It cannot be changed," the Singaporean instructor quickly replied. He was really afraid that the Korean instructor would go to the Monfei Military again. There is a detailed explanation. You can read it carefully. Just let the Korean students fight against the Chinese students. Don't let the other Asian students feel pressured. The instructor continued, "We all hope to see Korea win and defeat the Chinese students." Instructor Jin Jong's expression stiffened slightly. It sounded like they were not optimistic about Korea. Even the words hope were full of perfunctory. Instructor Jin Jong's eye, who had turned away from the computer, pinched his eyebrows as he felt a headache coming on. They actually went up against the Chinese students. Could the Chinese students really win? Chapter 36:54. The gold seed instructor from Korea had a headache because of the competition at night. Previously, he had thought that they were mediocre and could be easily defeated. However, reality had ruthlessly told him that he had been overthinking things. In fact, the results of the Chinese students today were enough to make him, an instructor, feel a chill in his heart. There was nothing more frightening than this. All along, most of the military personnel in Korea thought that China's military strength was far behind Korea's. Then, the military students they trained would definitely be inferior to Korea's in the future. Until he arrived at Monfei and saw a Chinese student almost fall down when she got off the bus. He thought that the Chinese students were very weak and that they were only participating in the competition to make up the numbers. Otherwise, how could Monfei miss out on the invitation letter? It was obvious that Monfei looked down on China and did not put them in his eyes. It was not that Korea looked down on China, but many other countries looked down on China. However, at the same time, they were also curious because their grand celebration shocked the world. Later, there was friction between China and neighboring countries. In the end, it was all talk and no action. China did not deal with it too strongly. After a hot and cold exchange, China returned to peace. This made the Korean military, who had been paying attention, think that although China's military strength had improved greatly, it was still not enough to be feared. This thought buried a hidden danger today. When they saw the Chinese girl fall down when she got off the bus, it was even more obvious that the Chinese students were very weak. But now, when the national flags of Korea and Korea appeared, there was a deep seriousness in his narrowed eyes. China was the opponent who had escaped death, while the Korean students wanted to trap the Chinese students. They would not allow a single Chinese student to escape death. When the number of Chinese students who escaped reached 8, the Korean students would lose. Similarly, when the Korean students captured 8 Chinese students, the Chinese side would lose. Things are a little troublesome. Jin Jong whispered in the instructor's ear and walked quickly to the rest of the students. The Korean student, Li Shanli, was holding a withered grass root in her hand and writing something on the ground. From her serious expression, it was obvious that she was thinking about something. Lu Anna, who was sitting beside her, looked even more gloomy, like the bottom of a black pot. The pressure on her was quite low. The other Korean students, sitting in a circle, were the same. There was not a trace of a smile on their faces. The atmosphere in the group was very tense. No one spoke, and everyone sat quietly. Until Li Shanli, who was snapping the dried grass in his hand, said, "We all overlooked the female student on the Chinese side. This is the biggest mistake we've made. Tianqin, who can understand our language, is not scary. The leader of the Chinese team is also not scary. The real scary one is Yi Qian. She is very quiet. She is so quiet that all of us ignore her. I now suspect that this is the Chinese side strategy to make everyone ignore their truly powerful students. Do you remember yesterday when the Chinese students got off the bus, one of them almost fell down?" The Korean students looked at Li Shanli and nodded their heads. They clearly remembered who the Chinese student who fell was. It was the Chinese female student, Yi Qian, who had defeated more than 100 students from other countries in the 800-meter steeplechase today. Yesterday, she had almost tripped when she got out of the car. Chapter 36:55. The coldness in Li Shanli's eyes turned slightly gloomy. She looked at the Korean students and said softly, "I suspect that the Chinese team started to confuse us from here. They purposely let us see Yi Qian fall when he got off the car. They want us to lower our guard against Yi Qian and achieve their goal." As soon as she said that, the Korean student's face turned serious again. If that was the case, then the Chinese team was too scary. Lu Anna was so angry that the corners of her mouth were slanted to one side. She gritted her teeth and said, "Despicable Chinese team. How can they be so despicable? They purposely let us see one of their students almost fall. Too despicable." At this moment, the Korean students had completely forgotten about the mocking laughter they let out when they saw Yi Qian almost fall when he got off the car. The Chinese team students are very arrogant. We need to let them know that if they are too arrogant, they will definitely fall miserably. A male student pulled at the withered grass beside his leg with one hand and said with a gloomy face, "We can't let them be proud for too long. There's still so many days of competition left. We must show our strength and make the Chinese team unable to be proud anymore." That's right. We must show our strength and make the Chinese team unable to raise their heads in the competition. Lu Anna, who had a deep prejudice against the Chinese team, strongly agreed. She couldn't wait to see the Chinese team's expressions when they lost miserably. The Korean students, including Li Shanli, all hoped to see this scene. From time to time, their gazes would sweep over to Yi Qian, who was resting not far away. It was difficult for Yi Qian to ignore their cold gazes. After looking up and seeing who they were, Yi Qian calmly retracted his gaze and talked to the students who were resting together. Tianqin, who was so tired that she sat on the grass to rest, rubbed her legs with both hands. She looked sideways at Yi Qian, who was sitting cross-legged and didn't look tired at all. She sighed and said, "How can your stamina be so good? They're already so tired that they are panting. How can you recover after just one round?" They're both outstanding students in the school, but the gap between them is too big. Yi Qian noticed that Tianqin was massaging her legs. Now that she had caught her breath, she leaned forward slightly and reached out to massage Tianqin's thighs. She replied, "I've trained a lot more than you guys. I've never rested during the winter and summer vacations. I've always participated in training. After a long time, I've become much stronger than most of the students. A match like today's hasn't exhausted my stamina to the limit yet. Look at the students from the United States, England, Germany, and Russia. They haven't reached their physical limits either. From this, we can see that they usually pay attention to physical training." It's said that a military academy student's overall fitness is more important than their academic performance, and that's indeed the case. This is especially true for us in the Army, where physical exhaustion is quite high. The Air Force Academy specializes in aerial combat, and the focus of your studies is completely different from that of the Army's infantry. Naturally, the focus of your studies is different. You will all be pilots in the future, and too much physical training will affect your physical fitness. Yi Qian explained her outstanding physical fitness in a low voice. The students listened attentively until instructor Li Jinyan strode over. Narrowly escaped death? When Tianqin heard this, she was a little puzzled. She asked, "This is the additional match for tonight's camping out? What does narrowly escaped death mean? What kind of narrowly escaped death means?" Li Jinyan gave a rough explanation and told the students which country the students they were competing against were from. When the Chinese students heard this, they looked at their instructor with meaningful smiles. Chapter 3656. The smiles on the students' faces caused a faint smile to appear in Li Jinyan's eyes as well. He would only smile slightly in front of the students. When he was with the instructors from various countries, his jawline would be slightly taut, and his stern and cold face would be filled with alienation. Yi Jian's interest was also piqued. She raised her eyes and looked in the direction of the Korean student. Coincidentally, her eyes met Li Shanli's. He probably did not expect her to suddenly look at him. After a moment of shock, he revealed a decent smile. Li Shanli's thoughts were much harder to read than Lu Anna's. When he met Yi Qian's gaze, he didn't feel uncomfortable. Yi Jian smiled and looked away. He lowered his voice and said slowly, "Since with a trap party, student Han, who wants to surpass us, has a chance to compete with us face to face. I'm sure they're ready to make a move. Since the competition is called Escape from the Jaws of Death, they will do everything they can to trap us. If we really meet them face to face, there might even be a contest of punches and kicks." After a pause, Yi Qian asked Li Jinyan, who was waiting for the students to ask questions, "Instructor, I don't think I heard anything about a contest of punches and kicks in the rules." "Any contest is allowed. Once the signal device on your body is destroyed, you lose. Of course, if the signal device on your opponent's body is destroyed, they will naturally lose." Seeing through Yi Qian's mischievous smile, Li Jinyan couldn't help but raise his hand to rub Yi Qian's head twice. After spending so much time with Xia Jinyuan, he had been influenced to the point where he even picked up the mischievous vibe. Then, he heard the students' gasps. Instructor Li, who was so cold that he kept people at arm's length, really doted on his little sister, Yi Qian. He even pretended to rub her head in front of them. As he touched her, he smiled warmly. His cold facial lines softened, and his face was slightly green. The young soldier, who was dressed in a military uniform, stood upright and stared at his sister with the softest gaze. His delicate eyebrows and handsome facial features warmed up with his smile. Even the wind that blew by had a hint of gentleness. The students who had never seen Li Jin smile before were shocked by his sudden warm smile. The male students came back to their senses quickly, but Tianqin came back to her senses a little too late. She stared blankly at the young soldier, who was smiling warmly. She felt her heart beat a little faster. Handsome. Too handsome. So handsome that her heart palpitated. "Camera, where is the camera? I want to take a picture and put it in a book." Li Jinyan heard the gasps beside him and knew that his actions were a little abrupt. He calmly retracted his hand and pursed his thin lips. The warmth between his delicate eyebrows suddenly receded like the tide, leaving only a faint smile. Escaping from the jaws of death is all about you escaping. As for how you escape, that's up to you. The only weapon you have with you is an unsharpened dagger. Go into battle lightly. Once you have a direct confrontation with your opponent, other than your fists and feet, you can only use a dagger. So, either you get beaten up, or they get beaten up. Choose one. Only these students would ask Li Jinyan to explain more. The smiles on the Chinese students' faces deepened. The mischievous vibe under Yi Qian's smile deepened. This, well, not bad. Very challenging. Seeing this, Li Jinyan tilted his head slightly and looked straight ahead. He didn't want the students to see the smile in his eyes, so he could only turn his head to hide it. Chapter 3657. The students didn't dare to look at him anymore. Instructor Li had returned to his usual self. He was cold and sharp, like a sword that had been sharpened until it glowed. His aura was threatening. If they looked at him for too long, they were afraid that they would be hurt by his aura. For the sake of their lives, it was better to avoid looking at him. Tianqin swallowed with difficulty and silently suppressed her racing heartbeat. He was handsome, but his aura was too strong. She couldn't control him. Standing in front of him was like standing between a giant and a small ant. Even if she looked up, he was still so far away. Tianqin, whose face was a little red, exhaled softly and slowly dispersed the sudden palpitation. She knew that she couldn't do it, so it was better for her to have some self-awareness. For someone like Instructor Lee, even if he wanted to find a girlfriend, he would find a girl who wouldn't be swallowed by his aura and who could bravely approach him. For someone like her, who didn't even dare to breathe in front of him, forget it. Li Jinyan, who looked away, didn't realize that his momentary warmth had caused a female student's heart to palpitate. He didn't join the student's discussion. He sat quietly and listened quietly, like a silent mountain, imperceptibly giving the students the most reassuring support. Since they're going to use their fists and feet, I'm sure they want to take the opportunity to fight with us. They might even be ruthless. When the time comes, we have to be on our guard. Don't get hurt by them. If they want to be ruthless to us, we can be ruthless to them too. As long as they make the first move, we won't hold back. Politeness demands reciprocity. What they do, we'll do the same. Let's see who will end up losing. In the smoky green light, the Chinese students sitting around and resting talked in low voices. When they laughed, they slightly lowered their voices to avoid giving others the impression that they were proud and arrogant. It was better to keep a low profile in order to secure the top 3 on the first day. Yi Qian and Zhang Minghong talked in low voices. Zhang Minghong was the team leader. If she had any ideas or suggestions, she would definitely talk to him first before saying them. After the two finished talking, Zhang Minghong clapped his hands lightly. The students who were talking and laughing in low voices immediately quieted down. Next was the tactical arrangement. They couldn't talk about anything unrelated to the competition. When it came to the tactical discussion, Li Jinyan, who was sitting with the students, stood up. You guys discuss among yourselves. I'll go take a walk nearby. He left all the initiative to the students and did not participate in the entire process. Coming out to compete was also a rare opportunity to train. Since it was a big competition between the students, as an instructor, there was no need for him to participate. It was up to them to decide for themselves. He calmly stood up and left. Several students couldn't help but look up and ask him, Instructor, aren't you going to give us some advice? Li Jinyan, who had already taken a step forward, stopped when he heard this. He lowered his gaze slightly and looked at the male student who had asked the question, then at Zhang Minghong and Yi Qian. His gaze returned to the faces of the students, and the corners of his mouth curved slightly. He said, What advice do you want me to give? It's about how to defeat the Korean students. How should we cooperate with each other throughout the competition? That's all. The male student who spoke shifted his butt and looked at Wang Yao expectantly. Li Jinyan asked all the students, Do you all want my advice? The students immediately echoed, Yes, 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 we want to hear it. Instructor is better than us. Your advice will definitely be very useful. Just say it. This time, you didn't say that the instructor is not allowed to discuss with the students. Chapter 3658. Perhaps it was because they had seen Li Jinyan smile gently at Yi Qian, but the students became bolder in front of him. After he finished speaking, they wanted him to continue. They all wanted the instructor to stay and give them some advice. Yes, yes. Look at the instructors from the surrounding countries. They are all discussing with the students. Don't walk around nearby. What if you get lost? Ha ha ha. If you get lost, we can find you back, instructor. As they spoke, they became relaxed again. It was mainly because of Li Jinyan's indifferent expression that made the students feel relaxed again. Yi Qian did not say anything. Based on her understanding of the Demon King and training, if he said he wanted to leave, he would definitely not stay. Sure enough, under the students' expectant gazes, Li Jinyan raised his eyebrows with a faint smile. Just when the students thought he would stay and say a few words, he laughed softly and said, Solve your own problems. Then, with a stride, he walked away, leaving behind the stupefied and incredulous students. They had been fooled by their own instructor. He had to solve his own problems by himself. But this wasn't his problem alone. Yi Qian lowered her head and couldn't stop laughing. Big Brother's expression just now was really very cute. It was the first time she realized that Big Brother had such a cute side to him. The Korean students also knew about the competition tonight. Just as Yi Qian said, when they found out that they would directly compete with the Chinese students in the camping competition tonight, they were all excited. When they found out that the Chinese students were the ones who were trapped, their eyes were cold. This is our chance. Li Shanli, you're a Brazilian jiu-jitsu student. Park Hai-hoon, you have a black belt in Taekwondo. The two of you have won gold medals in many domestic competitions. Now, the opportunity has come to our Korean students. The two of you should seize the opportunity and not make any more mistakes. Jin Zhangzai's instructor knew that they would be competing with the Chinese students. He was a little nervous because he did not know the rules. When he saw the rules clearly, Jin Zhangzai's instructor smiled. He even specially greeted Li Jinyin and said, "Please take care of me tonight." It was because he was confident that he had the guts to say that. The instructor was confident that he could win against the Chinese students. Similarly, the Korean students were also confident that they could win against the Chinese students. The smoky green screen turned into a sky full of stars. Insects chirped in the dark night. There was no moon at night, only starlight shrouding the entire forest. The shadows of the trees were hazy, and the visibility was reduced to only 2 to 3 meters. If someone was hiding behind the trees, there was no way to discover them. Monfei had a lot of insects at night. Even though he was dressed for training, he couldn't resist the mosquitoes. After hiding for a while, his face, hands, and body had been bitten countless times. It was very itchy. The Chinese team had to break out of the encirclement within 2 hours. If they couldn't break out of the encirclement within 2 hours, the entire team would be wiped out and the additional points would be lost. The competition area wasn't very big. It was a small forest with a diameter of no more than 500 meters. However, the thin trees were very dense. From one end of the small hill to the other, one had to climb. The Chinese students had to set off from the small hill, while the Korean students had to seal off the escape route. At the same time, they had to enter the forest to search for and capture the Chinese students. This time, the Korean students were not in a hurry. They were the ones chasing after the Chinese team. If the Chinese team did not break out of the encirclement within 2 hours, they would win. At this time, the Chinese team should be anxious. Chapter 3659. 2 hours was not tight, but it was not loose either. The 16 students from the Chinese team had already snuck into the forest and moved forward. Their footsteps were light, and they moved forward slowly. Their military boots stepped on the fallen leaves silently. They did not have any tools to help them move at night. They relied on their own eyes and ears to see and listen to their surroundings. This time, Yi Qian did not bring Tianqin with him. She would definitely be the focus of the Korean students in the competition in the afternoon. Bringing Tianqin with him would be a burden to her. Moreover, it was more suitable for her to fight alone in this kind of operation. She would first take care of the Korean students who were watching her, and then clear a path for her comrades behind her. It would be beneficial for them to break out of the encirclement. Yi Qian proposed to fight alone. At first, the students objected, mainly because they were worried that Yi Qian would not be able to get away safely if she was surrounded. However, the team leader, Zhang Minghong, agreed. No one knew better than him how good Yi Qian was at fighting alone. If there were students by her side, she would be restrained. With his agreement, Yi Qian was able to move alone. She moved very quickly. In 20 minutes, she had already entered the hinterland, which was the first line of defense of the Korean students. The forest was very quiet, and they could not sense anyone's presence. Yi Qian hid behind a tree with 2 stones in her hands and threw them in a certain direction. At the same time, she shook the trees beside her to create the illusion that there were 2 people walking side by side. The Korean student, Li Shanli, clenched her fists. Her pretty eyes were cold. The Chinese students were coming over. How fast? Were they not worried that the Korean students would cross the line of defense and ambush them? Did they think that the Korean students did not have the guts to cross the hinterland to ambush them? Thinking of this possibility, Li Shanli's face flashed with anger. She, who was hiding behind a tree, leaned out gently. Using the direction of the movement she heard as a coordinate, she searched as far as she could. Her partner was a male student. He was already slowly making his way towards the direction of the rustling leaves. His movements were very light, and in order to not make any noise under his feet, his speed was relatively slow. Only when there was no cover would he speed up and sweep past them. Yi Qian, who was hiding in the dark, was waiting for the Korean students to show themselves. In the dense forest, it was not easy to find a target immediately. Yi Qian, who had deliberately made some noise, did not move too far away. He hid within a meter radius and waited quietly. The soft sound of withered leaf being crushed drifted in her ears, like tiny animals coming out to look for food. Yi Jian, who was hiding in the dark, curled her lips slightly and locked onto her first target tonight. Li Shanli didn't go out immediately. This was their plan. One was in the light, and the other was in the dark. The two sides cooperated, so that even if the Chinese students escaped the students in the light, they wouldn't be able to escape from the students in the dark. Yi Qian had already moved out. Like the special forces of the Snowfield Brigade, she liked to fight at night. She was also good at fighting at night. Yi Qian had the upper hand when it came to special forces against military school students. Yi Qian silently chanted 5 times. Her target was right under her nose. Yi Qian did not make any noise. Like a slithering snake, she reached out with the dagger in her hand from behind the target. Although the dagger was not sharpened, the blade was still made of stainless steel. The cold blade silently pressed against the fatal part of the Korean student's body. The Korean student's body froze, and he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. If this was a real battlefield, then at this moment his throat would have been slit. Chapter 3660. The dagger was already at his throat. According to the rules of the competition, the Korean student had died. Yi Qian turned off his signal device and left silently, without saying a word. The signal device was destroyed, and a Korean student died. Instructor Kim Jong-jae's face darkened. He looked down at his watch, and his face stiffened. It had only been 20 minutes, and one of their students had died. It was an hour earlier than they had expected. When the Korean students were deployed, they thought that at most 2 students would die. The first one would die in about an hour, and the second one would die when they were trying their best to surround the Chinese students. At most, 2 people would be killed, no more. But in the end, one died in 20 minutes. Instructor Kim Jong-jae clenched his jaw. His heartstrings were stretched taut. Li Shanli. Now it all depended on whether Li Shanli could finish off a Chinese student. If she succeeded, at least the number of deaths would be equal. Li Shanli, who had been given hope by the instructor, did not know that the Chinese student she was with had been silently finished off by Yi Qian. She did not even know which Chinese student had done it. The Korean student, who was leaning against a tree, slowly sat down. He felt his knees go weak. He touched his neck gently. The cold touch of the dagger was still there. The moment that made his heart stop was clearly over, but he had not completely walked out of it. A dagger was protruding from his back, and he didn't even notice it. The Korean student's hand trembled as he touched his neck. There seemed to be someone standing behind him, and the dagger could be pressed against his neck at any time. The student's hand trembled, and even his body trembled slightly. Yi Qian, who had attacked from behind, had left a serious psychological trauma in the Korean student. Yi Qian was not far from the student. She did not leave immediately and was still waiting patiently. This was Korea's first line of defense. It was impossible for there to be only one student guarding it. There must be someone hiding in the dark. Her previous 2 actions did not attract the opponent's attention. It was clear that she was a student who could hold back her anger. Waiting was not Yi Qian's style. After some thought, she raised her hand and took a few branches. She pressed the branches tightly and then immediately released them. Swish! Voila! In the quiet forest, there seemed to be someone walking lightly. The sound of leaves rustling and a gasp of shock drifted into Li Shanli's ears. Li Shanli, who had been dormant for a long time, narrowed his eyes slightly and finally moved his feet. Little by little, he walked in the direction of the swaying leaves. Swish, swish, the leaves were still swaying, as if someone was slowly walking forward. Li Shanli held the dagger horizontally in his hand and slowly crept toward his target, who had accidentally shaken the tree branch. Yi Qian, who had been paying attention to what was behind him, finally saw a black shadow pass through the bearing branches, approaching him step by step. Yi Qian stopped in her tracks and dodged to the side. She took the initiative to approach her target. Li Shanli, who was chasing after him, was quite cautious. When she realized that the leaves in front of her had stopped rustling, she immediately stopped moving forward and quickly hid, secretly observing her surroundings. Once she was within range, Yi Qian would not give her another chance to hide. By the time Li Shanli sensed that something was wrong, Yi Qian was already within reach of him. She immediately launched an attack. Chapter 36-61. This time, the sneak attack on Yi Qian did not succeed immediately. Li Shanli, who had learned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, reacted quickly. She grabbed onto a tree branch with one hand and raised her leg to kick. Yi Qian, who also reacted quickly, dodged to the side and avoided the left leg. His hands were as fast as lightning as he grabbed onto Li Shanli's ankle and pulled hard. Li Shanli's entire body was pulled forward by Yi Qian, and her center of gravity was tilted forward. She had no choice but to grab onto the tree branch with both hands and use the strength of her arms to raise her right leg. With a soft shout, her right leg flew forward. Li Shanli's flexible body burst out with a strong force. His right leg kicked toward Yi Qian's face with a strong wind. Yi Qian quickly loosened her hands and dodged twice to avoid Li Shanli's foot attack. At this moment, Yi Qian knew that Li Shanli had extraordinary skills. The two of them stood opposite each other. After a brief exchange, Li Shanli finally realized who had ambushed her. She had guessed correctly. The best of the two female students on the Chinese side was not Tianqin, who could understand their language, but Yi Qian, who was easy to overlook. From her performance in the afternoon, it was clear that Yi Qian was the best. He was even better than the male students on the Chinese side. Yi Qian, she called out softly in broken Chinese. Then, as if she had thought of something, she suddenly turned her head to look for the male student who was with her. She and Yi Qian had made such a big commotion, but she did not see the male student who was with them. Li Shanli's heart sank. One of the Korean students had died. My partner has died, right? She did not give up and continued to ask Yi Qian. Although her English was fluent, her Korean accent was very strong. You purposely made a commotion in the beginning to lure us into a trap, right? Yi Qian felt that there was no need to answer this kind of question. Death in battle was death in battle. Could it be that you wouldn't be death in battle just because you asked? She didn't know the meaning of the question. Li Shanli saw that Yi Qian did not answer. Her eyes flashed fiercely. She gritted her teeth and scolded. What you did was very despicable. He had to answer even if he didn't want to. First of all, you guys are hiding here to ambush us while we are moving stealthily. I took care of my opponent, and this is what I should do. It has nothing to do with being despicable. Don't find excuses for your own incompetence. All is fair in war. You are lacking in strength. So how can you blame others for being despicable? Moreover, why are you hiding in the dark and waiting for us to walk right into your trap? Isn't that even more despicable? It seemed that the Korean students had a common problem. They liked to have double standards. They were strict with others and forgave themselves. Li Shanli sneered as he stared at Yi Qian's vague silhouette in the dark. He clenched his fists and said, "You Chinese people have always been cunning. You even pretended to fall from the car to make us lower our guard. You're despicable. I was just carsick. When I got out of the car, I lost my balance and almost fell. You actually thought that I deliberately fell in front of you just to make you let your guard down. Miss Li Shanli, you really know how to flatter yourselves. You think that China is a poor country and that all the students are weak. Now, I'll return the same words to you. In our eyes, your strength is just SOSO. Why do you need to make us spend so much effort? You should deal with it directly, just like how you dealt with your partner. Deal with it directly. There's no need to wait until dawn." Chapter 3662. It was probably because Yi Jian had been with Xia Jinyuan for a long time that she had learned to have a sharp tongue. Facing Li Shanli, who did not know how to respect others from the beginning, Yi Jian used words to fight back for the first time. It wasn't that he was weak, but that sometimes he didn't want to talk to you. Li Shanli was so angry that her whole body was trembling. You caused the death of our students, so tonight I will make you die. Yi Jian, I am Li Shanli. Please remember my name. My name will become your nightmare. Li Shanli, who was determined to make Yi Jian die, took the initiative to attack after saying that. Yi Jian almost laughed out loud when she heard the latter part of her sentence. Become her nightmare? Then let's see whose nightmare is. But since Li Shanli had the confidence to say such harsh words, then she must have her own reasons for doing so. Li Shanli's confidence came from her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was a type of martial art that specialized in subduing, grappling, mixed combat, and self-defense. Li Shanli started learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the age of 4, and it had been 19 years since then. She had won countless trophies, big and small, and was famous in Korea. Provoked by the death of her students, Li Shanli's new and old grudges came together. She only heard her clear and murderous shout in the quiet forest as she launched a fierce attack. Faced with Li Shanli's fierce attack, Yi Qian's lips curled slightly, and he took on an even fiercer stance. Since you're here, let's fight. Why waste time talking? Compared to her opponent's attack, Yi Qian's attack was more murderous and aggressive. It was not something that Li Shanli, a military academy student who had never been on a real battlefield, could defend against. So, when Yi Qian attacked, Li Shanli's face changed color. If she was said to have the momentum of a surging river, then Yi Jian was the momentum of a flowing river. Li Shanli, who did not have time to withdraw his hand, was clamped to death by Yi Jian's hands. Then, she twisted his elbow, and Li Shanli let out a miserable scream. Yi Qian's cold laughter could be heard amidst the screams. Excuse me, do you still have the confidence to become my nightmare? Yi Qian had been merciful. Otherwise, she would have broken Li Shanli's right arm. Li Shanli was so angry at Yi Qian's reaction that he ground his teeth so hard that they creaked. However, Yi Qian said, "Don't you think that I'm the one who will become your nightmare?" Without waiting for Li Shanli to reply, Yi Qian, with a cold smile on his face, raised his leg and attacked Li Shanli's lower body again. Li Shanli, who was shocked and angry at the pain in his arm, still wanted to struggle and escape, but in the end his lower body was attacked by Yi Qian again. He couldn't dodge in time, and his knee was viciously kicked by the jungle combat boots. Since he had said that he would teach the Korean students a lesson, he had to keep his word. It was a competition, so there had to be a winner and a loser. Then, he would rely on his own ability to win. Li Shanli, whose calf was in so much pain that it felt like it was about to break, had no chance to use his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Yi Qian's close combat was all about taking lives. There weren't too many fancy moves, only fierce and fatal. Li Shanli's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was completely useless in front of her. Oh, that's not right. It was more or less useful. He was able to nimbly dodge Yi Qian's initial killing move, unlike the Korean student who was defeated, who only realized it when the dagger was at his neck. After destroying her signal source, Yi Qian finally released his grip on her and smiled. A flower in a greenhouse is more suitable to stay in a greenhouse. You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth when you go outside. You think you're invincible in a greenhouse, and you can continue to be invincible outside. Chapter 3663. Li Shanli, whom they had placed their greatest hopes on and who would definitely take out at least 2 Chinese students, had died just like that. The entire time was no more than 5 minutes. Instructor Kim Jong-zai could not believe that Li Shanli had died so early on. When he saw the signal disappear, his first reaction was to think that there was a problem with the signal receiver. He immediately called for a technical soldier from Monfei to come over and check what was going on. The technical soldier who was called over looked at it again and re-established the signal receiver. Then, he said seriously, "There's no problem. The participating student has indeed died." It was not a problem with the signal receiver, nor was it a problem with the system. It was just a normal death. The speed of the death made Instructor Kim Jong-zai's face turn green and white. It was very interesting. Previously, he had even specially walked in front of Lee Jinyin and said, "Please take care of me tonight." In fact, the underlying meaning was, tonight, the Korean students would definitely ask the Chinese students for advice. They would definitely win against the Chinese students. In the end, he was slapped in the face. It was not just one slap, but 2 consecutive slaps. These 2 consecutive slaps caused his facial nerves to twitch, and his expression was slightly ferocious. Li Shanli had died in battle, and none of the Chinese students had died in battle. Instructor Kim Jong-zai's face was ashen as he stared at the flashing signal. Now it was Park Hae-sun's turn. It was all up to him. Instructor Kim Jong-zai could not believe that Li Shanli had died so quickly. Li Shanli herself could not believe it either. When Yi Qian destroyed her signal, she was completely stunned. How could this be? She actually lost? She lost to a Chinese student, and she lost so quickly. Not only did she lose, but she was also ruthlessly mocked by the Chinese student she looked down on. It made her lose face. Li Shanli clenched her fists so tightly that her fingernails almost pierced into her palms. Her gaze towards Yi Qian was also full of coldness. Yi Qian, who was standing right in front of her, could naturally feel it. Therefore, she really could not stand this kind of people who thought that it was right and proper to criticize others. They thought that everything they said was right. But when others used the same words, the same attitude, and the same tone to speak to her, she could not stand it and felt that she was being insulted. "Miss Li Shanli, do you still remember what you said when we met yesterday?" Yi Qian suddenly blurted out a string of words in Korean. After he finished speaking, Li Shanli, whose eyes were filled with coldness, felt his chest tighten. Yesterday, she had said, "The Chinese female students are very pretty, like the porcelain in the display case. You can't touch them, you can only look at them." That was to say that the Chinese students were weak and could be defeated with a gentle touch. But today, Yi Qian had repeated her words word for word. Li Shanli knew that what he had heard tonight was just the Chinese students returning the compliment. Our country has a saint who says, "Don't do unto others what you don't want done unto you." Miss Li Shanli, you disrespected our students first and even showed contempt for our country. Then, don't blame us for being rude. Compared to how you humiliated our students before, I'm just returning the favor now. This is already the magnanimity of the Chinese side. Please remember, if you want to compete in a fair and square competition, don't look down on others and say things that don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. You think that you have a right to look down on others, but do you know that in our hearts, what you've done is shameful? Finally venting the anger that had been bottled up in his heart yesterday, Yi Qian no longer paid any attention to Li Shanli, who was as stiff as a rock, and disappeared into the night. Chapter 36-64. Li Shanli was already dead, but there were still 14 students left. Based on a number of dead people, they still had to deal with 6 more students. There were still 24 minutes until the rendezvous with his comrades. Yi Qian rushed toward the rendezvous point. Yi Qian, who walked like a cat strolling along the roof, left Li Shanli's line of sight. The rustling of branches could be heard, first getting closer and then further away until it could no longer be heard. Li Shanli, who was holding her twisted elbow, stood in place expressionlessly. Her gaze was fixed in the direction Yi Qian had disappeared, and she did not look away for a long time. It was only when the male student Yi Qian had defeated came over that Li Shanli snapped out of her daze. She moved her body, which had not moved for a long time, and turned her head to look at the student whose silhouette was gradually coming into view. Li Shanli waited until the student was right in front of her before she asked softly, "How did she find you just now? Why didn't I hear your warning at all?" If she had heard the warning from the male student, she would not have been so careless. She would not have been so careless and lost Yi Qian so quickly. She would not have lost so miserably. When the male student heard this, he first raised his head to look at Li Shanli, then lowered his head and smiled bitterly. When I noticed her, the combat dagger in her hand was already pressed against my neck. She reached out from behind me, and I did not notice at all. I think we were all wrong. The Chinese students are really not weak. It is not shameful for us to lose to them. The instructor also made a mistake in his judgment. He thought we could win this round against the Chinese team. It will be very difficult to win against the Chinese team. I think it will be very difficult for us to win against the Chinese team in individual and team competitions. They are not as weak as we thought. Our previous thinking was wrong, completely wrong. There's a story in the Chinese team. It says that there's a frog in a well. When it looks up, the sky is only as big as the mouth of the well. Therefore, it has always believed that the sky is only as big as the mouth of the well. We're the frogs sitting in the well. We have no idea how big the sky is outside. We need to understand the Chinese team correctly. If we don't, then we will always live in the well. The male student's words made Li Shanli even more silent. After a while, she pursed her lips and remained silent for a while before saying, "You're right. Right now, we're like the frog in the well. We think we're very powerful, but in fact, we're just a joke in the eyes of others." They had no intention of becoming a joke. The two Korean students who had been dealt with by Yi Qian stood where they were, reflecting on their own actions. Li Shanli, who felt that he had been humiliated, was also reflecting on himself. They were both top students in school, so they were quick to recognize their mistakes. They were also brave enough to admit their mistakes. However, Luina was different. Until now, she still didn't feel that she was wrong. She still thought that she was right. Their Korean students were the best. Therefore, when she saw Yi Qian, her first reaction was not to think that Yi Qian had killed two Korean students. Instead, she mocked him and said, "You came here secretly because you didn't dare to alert our students, right?" This was the only explanation that could explain why Yi Qian would appear in front of her like this. It was also the only way Luina could continue to maintain her arrogance. Meeting Luina was purely a coincidence. Yi Qian heard the sound of footsteps in front of him and slowly approached. Then, he saw Luina, who had not hidden herself well and was looking up at the stars. She still had the leisure to look at the stars during a competition. Her mental fortitude was very strong. Chapter 36-65. The reason why Luina was able to look at the stars so leisurely was because she thought that with Li Shanli in front of her, she would be very safe. It was so safe that she would have no problem looking up at the stars. While she was looking at the stars, she bumped into Yi Qian, who had already finished off the two Korean students. Naturally, she would die. However, Luina did not think that she would die. After asking the question, she pulled out her dagger and stared coldly at Yi Qian. "It's no use sneaking over here. Once you're here, don't even think about going anywhere." Her words made Yi Qian laugh involuntarily. To be honest, she could not understand why the Korean students thought so highly of themselves and raised themselves up time and time again. In the end, they fell down again and again. Yet, they were not afraid of falling and continued to raise themselves up even after falling down. They had no intention of reflecting at all. It was as if what they said was not important. What was important was that they wanted to feel comfortable and to put on a brave front. Other things were fine. Occasionally, they would say a few words to make themselves look better. It was understandable. What she could not understand was that they could do this in a competition. Could it be that they had been living off the lies of others in the past? Was that why they could continue to lie to themselves when they were outside? Laughing involuntarily, Yi Qian also pulled out his dagger. He raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled faintly. "All right, then let's see who can stay and who can't go anywhere." "Of course it's you who can't go anywhere." Luina's face was full of mockery. "Who else do you think it is?" Yi Qian, who was paying attention to the movements around him, did not want to waste time talking nonsense with her. He simply took the initiative to attack. Dealing with Luina was much easier than dealing with Li Shanli. Luina was fighting like a textbook. Her movements were solid and precise. She also had speed and strength. It was just that she did not know how to be flexible. She only used this move and that move. She was completely following the textbook. Once she used the previous move, he would know what her next move would be. It was this kind of move that made Yi Qian's eyes filled with mockery. He had thought that would be very powerful, but in the end, it was just SOSO. Lu En's dagger was blocked by Yi Qian's dagger. Their daggers were like a cross. No matter how hard Lu En had tried, she couldn't pull her dagger back. Her expression stiffened as she pursed her lips. She raised her leg and kicked Yi Qian. It was only the first move. Just as she raised her leg to kick, Yi Qian seemed to have sensed it. He quickly raised his leg and viciously kicked towards her knee. Clang, clang. The sound of metal falling on a rock was heard, followed by Lu En's screams. Her screams were louder than Li Shanli's and resounded through the forest, scaring away several birds. Lu En's screams. Yi Qian has made his move. Li Xiang stopped in his tracks and looked ahead. That was where the Korean army was guarding. They needed to break through the Korean army's defense line and escape from the encirclement. But from the looks of it, it seemed that it was not as serious as escaping from death. It was like breaking through a normal blockade. There was no feeling of escaping from death at all. The two students from a naval academy heard this. One of them was in charge of guarding, while the other whispered, "Yi Qian and Instructor Li are siblings. The brother is so powerful. The sister is naturally not that bad. You have not seen her more powerful side. If you have, you will be scared to death. Yi Qian, who dares to kill, will definitely have no problem taking care of 1 or 2 Korean students." Li Xiang muttered in his heart. He did not stay any longer and continued to move forward. Chapter 36-66. Other than Yi Qian, there were 15 of them. They were divided into teams 5, 6, and 6. They would set off from the left, middle, and right respectively, and then attack the Korean students from both sides. The student from the Naval Academy heard Lu En scream, and so did Jiang Yang from the Air Force Academy. Tianqin was more anxious. She was afraid that something would happen to Yi Qian. She lowered her voice and asked, "Did Yi Qian do something? Can she win? How many Korean students did she encounter? We should hurry over and support her." She asked a series of questions. She didn't dare to stay for a moment. She just wanted to go over and support Yi Qian. The students from the Air Force Academy and Yi Qian were moving along the same route. It would be faster for them to go over and support her. Jiang Yang saw that she was so anxious that she wanted to run, so he quickly pulled her back. "Don't worry. Yi Qian can handle it by herself. She could have killed Lu En without letting her scream, but she let her scream. This means that Yi Qian must have her own plans. Let's stick to our previous plan and not expose ourselves." But Tianqin still wanted to say something, but another student said softly, "Didn't Instructor Li say that we should listen to Yi Qian's plans? Since Yi Qian has already made an appointment with us, then we will meet her at the agreed time." But what if something happens to Yi Qian before the agreed time? Tianqin was most worried about this. Jiang Yang shook his head and said with certainty, "No, Yi Qian will be fine. I believe in her." When she killed Lu En, her actions were so practiced that even now, he still felt a lingering fear. In the end, the 3 male students left the port, and she sneaked into the cargo ship alone. If the military trusted Yi Qian so much, then she must be fine. Jiang Yang trusted Yi Qian very much. The other 2 students from the Air Force Academy also trusted Yi Qian. They all believed that Yi Qian would be fine. Tianqin saw this and slowly calmed down. The students from the National University of Science and Technology were even more so. Lu En's scream was heard, but the 3 of them didn't stop and continued moving forward. Who was Yi Qian? An influential figure in a national science university. When they were practicing Sanda, she heard from the students in her class that even the instructor didn't want to spar with Yi Qian. They said that Yi Qian had a murderous aura around her and that people couldn't help but take her seriously. It was confirmed that there was such a thing. Yi Qian, who was trusted by all of the students, had already started to deal with the 3rd Korean student. The other party tried to sneak up on her from behind. In the end, Lu En grabbed Lu En's wrist and pulled her back, causing her to collide with the Korean student who was trying to sneak up on her. The collision was not in a good spot as it happened to hit the other party's nose. There was a long beeping sound from the signal device. Luina, who had collided with the students from her own country, saw stars in front of her eyes. She didn't even realize that she had died. However, the student whose nose was hit by the warm liquid flowing out noticed it. The student, who was in so much pain that he was about to cry, covered his nose and reminded Luina in a muffled voice, "Look at your signal device. Is it broken?" Luina, who was seeing stars, didn't care that she had fainted. She hurriedly checked the signal device on her body. She was already dead. In just a short while, she had already died in battle. How is this possible? I haven't fought with her yet. Luina was flustered and exasperated. She hadn't even properly taught the Chinese student a lesson. How could she die in battle? Instructor Kim Jong-zai also wanted to ask, how is this possible? 3 students had already died in battle. How is this possible? Chapter 36-67. In less than an hour, 3 students had died. How many more students would die after an hour? The instructor did not dare to think too deeply about it. Luina was the one who couldn't accept it the most. Before the fight, she had imagined countless ways to teach the Chinese student she hated a lesson. Scenes of her defeating the Chinese student until he cried appeared in her mind. She had fantasized so much that she was sure she could do it. As someone who could represent her country in a competition overseas, her ability and strength had been recognized. Thus, she believed she could definitely defeat a student from a poor country. So when she discovered Yi Qian, she was secretly delighted. However, her dream was so beautiful that when the cruel reality happened, Luina could not accept her death. How could she have died? The Chinese student should be the one who died. She was so angry that she stomped her feet. Meanwhile, the male student who had failed to sneak an attack on Yi Qian was alarmed. He had been hiding in the dark, waiting for an opportunity to make his move. He wanted to wait until the Chinese student and Luina's team were in a stalemate before he made his move. If the 2 of them attacked together, they would definitely be able to kill one of the Chinese students. But he quickly realized that his thinking was too simple. It was not that they had killed the Chinese student, but that the Chinese student was about to kill Luina. Realizing that the situation was not right, he could no longer hide and quickly came out to help. A sneak attack from the back should have succeeded. That was what he thought, but the result was not what he expected. Luina was killed, and his nose was bleeding. It was so painful that he could not even open his eyes. Luina was so angry that she kept muttering, "Impossible, impossible." How could it be impossible? The truth was right in front of her. So what was impossible? At this moment, Luina still remembered that they were in the middle of a competition. Unable to accept reality, she could only suppress the anger in her heart and say to the male student, "I was careless. Be careful. Don't give her another chance to advance." "I'll try my best." The male student, who had not recovered from the pain in his nose, nodded gently. He would definitely try his best, but he could not guarantee that he would succeed. She had discovered his sneak attack and killed Luina in passing. Her movements were so fast that he did not even have time to react. With such skills, he did not have much confidence in winning. Luina, on the other hand, believed that her country's student would definitely win. "You can beat her. She's just a Chinese student. We can definitely beat her." Luina, who thought that her death was due to carelessness and carelessness, continued to maintain the confidence that her country's students would definitely win. But soon, cracks appeared in this confidence, and their instructor, Jin Zhong's confidence in the instructor has been cracked. The first 3 students died, one after another, and before he could catch his breath, another student's signal source went out. The 4th Korean student had died. Jin Zhong was so angry that he almost vomited blood. What's going on? What was wrong with their country's students? For people had died in less than an hour. What the hell were they doing? Were they all sleeping? Jin Zhong, who was so angry that he almost vomited blood, had an ugly expression on his face. The instructors of the surrounding countries all took a few steps away from him. 4 Korean students had been killed by the Chinese team in less than an hour. Could it be that they were the first group to have a winner? Yi Qian raised his foot, picked up the dagger that he had accidentally stepped on, and handed it to the fourth Korean student who had died. You can't lose the dagger. You have to take it back. Otherwise, you will lose points again. Chapter 36-68. The student had been pushed down by Yi Qian, and his hand were pinned behind his back. He probably used too much force. When Yi Qian bent down to pick up the dagger and returned it, the Korean student had yet to get up. Of course, it was also possible that he felt embarrassed and wanted to wait for Yi Qian to leave before getting up. He did not reach out to take the dagger. Yi Qian raised his eyebrows and threw the dagger to the side. Not going to take it? What? Did he still want her to coax him? What are you doing? An angry shout suddenly rang out. Luena, the student who had been killed, had rushed out, ignoring the competition rules. She had been angered by Yi Qian's action of throwing the dagger away. He dashed over and blocked Yi Qian's path. Pick it up, he said. Luena, who was full of anger after losing, was using this as a pretext to make a fuss. She thought that she would definitely defeat the Chinese student, but in the end, she didn't win, and the other male student also didn't win. The anger in Luena's heart grew bigger and bigger, so big that she threw the competition rules aside. Yi Qian looked at her coldly. Fortunately, the night was dark, so he could not see the hostility under her cold eyes. Otherwise, it would have scared him. Although the hostility in her eyes could not be seen clearly, Luena could not help but shrink her shoulders when she sensed the cold aura emanating from her. The male student who had not gotten up realized that something was wrong and quickly stood up to pull Luena behind him. He bowed and apologized to Yi Qian. I'm sorry, I'll pick up the dagger myself. She threw your dagger, so she should be the one to pick it up. Why are you apologizing? Luena rushed out recklessly and even pointed at Yi Qian, saying she did something wrong. Does she need us to apologize? She should be the one apologizing to us. She spoke quickly and anxiously in her native language. She was angry, but there was also a hint of arrogance in her anger. Yi Qian did not understand what she said, but her tone was enough to make Yi Qian not know whether to laugh or cry. This is a competition. If you have any opinions, you can give feedback to the referee and the instructor. You've already died and lost the right to stop me. If you insist on stopping me. Miss Luena, you haven't forgotten the rules of the competition, have you? Competition, Luena's body stiffened. In her exasperation, she had forgotten that they were in a competition. Then, she heard Yi Qian say, if you insist on stopping me, I don't mind knocking you down again. But I don't think you want to be defeated by me a second time. The first time you lost, you even forgot the rules of the competition. The second time, I'm afraid you'll go crazy. The Korean male student was really worried that Luena would not be able to take it and rush out. He quickly pulled her behind him and grabbed her wrist tightly. He lowered his voice and said, Yi Qian is very powerful. We can't beat her. We don't have the right to stop her. Right now, only the two of us should be dead. As she spoke, she heard the sound of footsteps and low voices coming from the forest. Luena could tell who was talking, and her eyes lit up. Just as she was about to raise her voice, her mouth was covered by the male student beside her. Don't make a sound. The male student was frightened by Luena's action of standing on tiptoe and raising her neck. They were already dead, so they could not say a word. If Luena really shouted, she would implicate the other students and cause them to die as well. Luena reacted and swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Yi Qian had already walked away. Chapter 36-69. According to the rules of the competition, dead students were not allowed to communicate with students who were still in the competition. Therefore, when Li Shanli and her partner walked over, even though Luena wanted to tell them that the Chinese student Yi Qian was nearby, she could only keep her mouth shut. Especially when she saw Yi Qian leave, Luena was so anxious that she stomped her feet. The male students with her also looked anxious. There was nothing more urgent than watching a good opportunity to get rid of a Chinese student slip away right in front of their eyes, and all they could do was watch and not do anything. When Li Shanli saw Luena stomping her feet anxiously, the light in her eyes dimmed. She spoke first. Oh, Fiona. She had just called out Luena's name, But before she could finish her sentence, Luina thought that she had forgotten the rules of the competition. She was so frightened that she waved her hand, indicating that Li Shanli should not speak to her. She then made a horizontal cut across her neck, indicating that she had died in battle and that they should not speak to her. Li Shanli and Luina came from the same military academy, the same class, the same dormitory, and had a good relationship. Li Shanli immediately understood what she meant. Li Shanli pressed the corner of his mouth and said, "Like you, I died in battle." Yi Qian from the Chinese team. It was difficult to say what he wanted to say. It was like opening his wound again. Li Shanli closed his eyes and took a deep breath, then closed his eyes again and said with difficulty, "Both Minjun and I died in battle. Oh, Fiona, both of us are now like you, dead in battle." "What?" Luina's eyes widened in disbelief. "Shanli, what did you just say? You said that both you and Che Minjun were defeated by Yi Qian? Is that so? Is that so?" "Yes, both Minjun and I were defeated by him." Luina repeated herself bitterly. She had no choice. Her father was a high-ranking general in the Korean military. Even if she did not want to mention it, she still had to tell Luina. It was like a thunderclap that exploded directly above Luina's head. She was completely stunned. She opened her mouth, but her throat and eyes seemed to be numb, causing her to temporarily lose her voice. Her ears were in a mess, as if something was screaming, and twisting, causing her to be unable to calm down. Yi Qian had actually defeated Li Shanli. Li Shanli walked closer and hugged Luina. At this moment, she realized that Luina's body was as stiff as a block of wood. "It's okay, Ina. It's okay. Yi Qian is indeed very good. We have to admit that she is much better than us. Fiona, when we return to China, we need to tell them that they can no longer underestimate the Chinese side, especially the Chinese military academy students. They are much more powerful than we imagined." The two male students patted each other on the shoulder, using this method to comfort themselves and their comrades. Li Shanli was right. The Chinese student Yi Qian was indeed better than them. "Very good." The male student, Che Minjun, said in a dry and hoarse voice. "Shanli told me that Yi Qian had an aura that made her uncontrollably afraid. She also said that Yi Qian had gone easy on her. Otherwise, her right hand would have been fractured by now." The male student who had ambushed Yi Qian sighed softly and said, "It was the same for me. Both my hands were locked behind my back. If I used any more force, my shoulders would have been dislocated." After the two of them finished speaking, they patted each other on the shoulder again, smiling bitterly. Chapter 3670. On the other hand, Li Shanli was pushed away by Luina. Caught off guard, Luina let out a startled cry as she fell to the ground. Both of her hands were on the ground, and her left hand happened to hit a sharp stone, causing blood to flow out. The noise was loud, and the two male students turned their heads at the same time. They did not see what had happened. In the darkness of the night, they only saw Li Shanli fall to the ground. "Shanli," Che Minjun stepped forward and quickly helped her up. "Did you fall? Can you get up?" Li Shanli bit her lower lip and shook her head. "I didn't fall. I can get up. Let's go. Don't stay here." Li Shanli was angry that she was pushed to the ground so suddenly. She ignored Luina and stood up to refuse Che Minjun's help. She rubbed her right hand and slowly walked out of the forest. Didn't she sneak over? Why are you the ones who were defeated? She's just a Chinese student. How good can she be? How good can she be? How good can she be? Can she be compared to us? She can't be compared at all. Why did she defeat you? It's because you didn't do your best. Why didn't you do your best to defeat her? Why didn't you teach her a lesson? Tell me, why didn't you teach her a lesson? Are you scared? Are you guys scared? Only Lu and his sharp questioning could be heard in the dark forest. Among the 4 defeated Korean students, the other 3 had already accepted the fact. However, due to family reasons, she could not accept the fact no matter what. She even thought that Yi Qian won because the students did not do their best. The male student standing beside her could not take it anymore. He said coldly, "Why didn't I see you defeat the Chinese student? Yi Qian defeated you in less than 3 minutes. What right do you have to say that we didn't do our best? Luina, what right do you have to talk about us? Li Shanli, who was walking out of the forest, stopped. She did not turn around. With her back facing Luina, she said softly, Ina, go back and ask the commander. We also want to know why the Chinese student is so strong. Xianyu, don't ask Fiona anymore. Let her go back and ask the commander herself. We've already tried our best. They had already worked very hard, but the Chinese side was far stronger than them. No matter how hard they worked, they could not change the situation. This time, they had to admit defeat. Luina, who refused to admit defeat, did not follow them. She glared at the male student beside her and said fiercely, Jin Xianyu, you go with the two of them. I want to see our students defeat Yi Qian with my own eyes. Park Hai-sun is right in front. He will definitely defeat Yi Qian. Luina herself did not realize that the only person who could defeat Yi Qian was Park Hai-sun, the most powerful student among them. On the other hand, the Chinese students, who had split into 3 groups, had already approached the last line of defense of Korea and started a fight. Li Jinyan quietly looked at the signal source representing the Chinese students. It had already been an hour and 5 minutes. 5 Korean students had died, while 0 Chinese students had died. When 8 people from the other side died, the Chinese side would win. The other 10 or so Korean students were hiding very well. He could not rule out the possibility that some of the Chinese students would die. However, with Yi Qian around, she would definitely pull them out one by one. The next hour would be the most exciting part of the escape from death. He was looking forward to it. Chapter 3671. The Chinese instructor, Li Jinyan, was looking forward to the next exciting performance of the Chinese students. However, the Korean instructor, Kim Jong-jae, was already worried. The strength of the Chinese students showed him how big the gap was. There were still 55 minutes left. He could only hope that the Chinese students could hide well and not be found and killed one by one. They had already lost enough face. He hoped that there would be no more. If all of them were found by the Chinese students, he also hoped that the Chinese students could do their best to compete with the Chinese students. That way, even if they lost, they would lose in a slightly better way. Escape by the skin of teeth was mainly to test the individual physical fitness of the students. Close combat was also a type of physical fitness. Choosing to compete at night was to test the students' psychological behavior. It was to see if the students' courage and ability to adapt on the spot were strong. The courage of the Chinese and Korean students was not bad, but their ability to adapt on the spot was obviously worse than the Chinese students. Their individual physical fitness was also weaker than the Chinese students. From this, it could be seen how big the gap between the 2 countries' military school students was. The instructors of the other countries saw it and remembered it in their hearts. Before the first day of the competition ended, they had a very deep impression of the Chinese students. It overturned their previous impression of the Chinese students and gave them a new understanding of the Chinese students. The Japanese instructor had been paying attention to the match between the Chinese team and the Korean team. When he saw that the Korean team had lost 4 students to the Chinese team in less than an hour, the Japanese instructor's face was tense. He was so serious that it was as if the dead students were from his country. Looking at the current results of the Chinese and Korean students, the Japanese instructors were once again determined to study how the Chinese trained their students. Another signal source disappeared. Instructor Kim Jong-jae couldn't help but take off his military cap and scratch his hair with one hand. Another student had died. 1 hour and 14 minutes, a total of 5 students had died, while the Chinese students continued to have 0 deaths. The difference of 0 to 5 was only between the Chinese and Korean teams. In the competition between the other countries, even if one side had lost 5 students, the other side would have lost 3 students. As a result, the competition between the Chinese and Korean students was even more closely watched by the instructors of the other countries. From time to time, they would look over to see if there were any new developments. When they saw that the 7th Korean student had died, several instructors sucked in a breath of cold air. 7 Korean students died, and the Chinese team still has 0 deaths. This is unbelievable. Is there something wrong with the signal device? An instructor from Asia was surprised. He walked to Jin Zhongzai's side and kindly reminded him, "You can ask the Monfei military technical soldiers to come and see. The disparity is too big. It's hard to believe." Korea's military strength was not weak. So how could their country's military academy students be weak? He couldn't accept the current state of the game. Monfei, the military technicians have already checked it. There are no problems. A dark-skinned instructor from Qin answered, "I can only say that the strength of the Chinese students is very strong." Since it had already been checked, there was naturally no problem. Instructor Jin Zhongzai didn't want to communicate with anyone at this moment. Even if the two instructors from Asia took the initiative to talk to him, he didn't want to speak. They had lost the entire match without losing a single person. On the other hand, it was very likely that the Chinese side would have 0 casualties. Such a disparity made him feel a burning pain in his face. Chapter 3672. However, things were far from that. The staff of the Monfei military came over and told instructor Jin Zhongzai, with a very cold face, that a female student from Korea had stopped a non-deceased student from moving forward when she was already dead. This was a serious violation of the competition rules. Based on the judgment, Korea would be deducted 10 points. If there was a next time, all the scores would be directly returned to 0, and they would not be allowed to continue participating in the competition. If losing to the Chinese team made instructor Jin Zhongzai lose face, then the words of the Monfei military were like an invisible slap on his face. Instructor Jin Zhongzai wished he could find a hole to hide in. Hearing this, the instructors of the other countries all looked over. It was not the look of a good friend or a cold shoulder, but a look full of faint ridicule. Losing to the Chinese team was nothing. Everyone had seen the strength of the Chinese team. But directly violating the competition rules and stopping the Chinese team from moving forward when the Chinese team was already dead showed that there was a problem with the student's character. Instructor Jin Zhongzai's face had already turned green and white. In the face of the warning of the Monfei military, he could only lower his voice and said seriously, "I will definitely deal with this matter properly. There will never be a similar situation again." Being disqualified, it was not just a small loss of face, but a loss of face for Korea in the whole world. Luina did not know that her actions were being monitored by the Monfei military. After getting rid of Li Shanli and the other two, she suppressed the anger in her heart and ran through the forest alone, rushing to the last line of defense of the Korean team. When she was about to reach the last line of defense, the sound of fighting came from the dense branches. It was not just one place, but several places. Luina, who finally caught up, suddenly brightened up. With a happy face, she pushed aside the branches and stepped on the fallen leaves to walk quickly. The night was dark and the forest was pitch black. Luina could only see a vague outline within a meter. She was afraid that she would fall, so she could only speed up instead of running. The Chinese students had already started fighting with the Korean students. After Luina, Li Shanli and 3 others died in battle. Another 3 died in battle. 16 against 9, the Chinese team had a great chance of winning. They only needed to knock down one more Korean team to win. The remaining 9 Korean students were facing the advancing Chinese students. They knew that the situation was dangerous, so they were very cautious. Some students even directly avoided the Chinese students, not daring to face them. 2 male students tried to sneak attack Tianqin. Jiang Yang and another student from the Air Force Academy attacked together. The 4 male students used every trick they had learned to kill each other as soon as possible. Park Hai-sun rubbed the back of his hand that was numb and painful from the kick. He stared at the Chinese female student who was fighting him with a heavy gaze. He did not dare to attack casually anymore. Just now, when he initiated the attack, his lower abdomen and hands were ruthlessly kicked, but he didn't even touch a corner of his opponent's clothes. He could still hear the sounds of fighting around him. He pursed his lips and made a request to Yi Qian. "Can you let your students stop fighting and give me some time to talk to you?" This request was met with Yi Qian shaking his head. This is a competition. I have no right to stop my comrades from competing with you. Furthermore, this will not affect the competition between you and me. I know we will lose tonight. I just want to fight with you one-sidedly. If I win, I will definitely not continue the competition. Park Hae-sun wanted to know how strong Yi Jian was and whether he could defeat Yi Jian. That was why he made such a request. Otherwise, if another student from the Chinese team defeated another student from the Chinese team, he and Yi Jian would have no chance of continuing the competition. Chapter 36-73. As the team leader, Park Hae-sun knew better than anyone that the Chinese team had rushed to their last defense line in such a short time and did not kill a single member of the Chinese team along the way. Their strength had already surpassed the Korean team. He had already seen what the ending would be, so he tried to see if he could delay the arrival of the ending a little so that the Korean team would not lose so badly. That's right, Park Hae-sun was using another method to delay the arrival of the ending so that he could save his last shred of face. Yi Jian did not give him a chance. A competition was a competition. The most important thing was the feeling of conquering the opponent. If the competition could be negotiated, then it would not be a competition. It could only be called an exchange of pointers. I'm sorry, but I can't agree to your request. Yi Jian's rejection once again made Park Hae-sun's expression turn ugly. He thought that he had already lowered his head, but still did not receive any forgiveness. His voice turned colder. Do you think you can definitely win against me? Why can't I think so? Do you think you can still win against me? Facing the inexplicable arrogance of the Korean team, Yi Jian did not endure it like yesterday. What else could he endure when he was already in the competition? If there was a grudge, he would take revenge on the spot. He would not let it pass the night. Yesterday, when he had just arrived, he had been bitten before even entering the Monfei military camp. Now that he had a chance to return the favor, how could he miss it? If he missed this opportunity, there might not be another one. Park Hae-sun, who knew that he could not delay the time, gritted his teeth and directly pulled out the dagger that was issued to the team from his waist. He looked coldly at the Chinese team member, who made him unable to step down. Okay, then let's see who will win. Lu Ina, who heard the voice, was about to rush out when someone quickly grabbed her wrist. Lu Ina, do you know what you are doing? The instructor told us that there will be Monfei military monitoring this area. If you rush out, you will be violating the competition rules. Cha Min-jun, the Korean team member, had an angry look on his face. He pulled Lu Ina tightly, who had already made their backs break out in cold sweat, and scolded in a low voice. You better pray that your actions were not discovered by the referee just now. It's impossible to be discovered. Let go of me. Park Hae-sun and Yi Jian are going up against each other. I must see him beat up Yi Jian until he begs for mercy. Lu Ina, who didn't know that her actions had already deducted 10 points from Korea, only wanted to see Yi Jian get beaten up and restore Korea's prestige. Facing the students' persuasion, not only did she not thank them, but she was also very angry. Let go of me, do you hear me? In school, Lu Ina had the temper of a spoiled brat. In addition, her performance in school was very outstanding, and her personal overall results were ranked at the top. She was even more arrogant, and the words she said most often were, "Our Korea is so and so." She had always thought that their country, their army, and their military academy students were very powerful, much stronger than the Chinese. She had always thought so, and it was only natural for her to think so. However, today's repeated defeats had destroyed Lu Ina's self-righteous sense of superiority. Therefore, she was now anxious to get back all her sense of superiority, and the way to get back her sense of superiority was she needed to see Yi Jian defeated to prove that Korea was indeed stronger than the Chinese. Her anxiety was not known by others. Now that she was stopped, Lu Ina was anxious and angry. She forcefully shook off the hand that was grabbing her wrist. Cha Min-jun, let go of me. Do you hear me? Don't you want to see Yi Jian defeated by Park Hae-sun? Chapter 36-74. The last sentence really touched the hearts of the Korean students. They really wanted to see Park Hae-sun defeat Yi Jian, and see Yi Qian admit defeat on his face. Cha Minjun slowly loosened his clenched fists. His tense jaw moved slightly as if he was considering it. Li Shanli's eyes flashed as he glanced at him, then at Lu Ena. He was also tempted. She knew that she was defeated by Yi Qian and admitted that Yi Qian was strong. But if she had to accept the truth, she couldn't do it. Also, Lu Ena wasn't wrong. She also wanted to see Yi Qian defeated by Park Hai-sun, because she had defeated Park Hai-sun before. If Park Hai-sun could defeat Yi Qian, then she could definitely defeat Yi Qian. This defeat was purely an accident. Li Shanli, who was tempted, bit her lower lip. She didn't say anything. This meant that she also wanted to go and take a look. The male students were more determined than the female students. Kim Hyun-woo, who was hiding behind the tree, saw that Li Shanli didn't say anything. He quickly whispered, "If Park Hai-sun defeats Yi Qian, then we will also know. Why must we go?" Lu Ena glared at the people behind the tree. She then gritted her teeth and said, "She defeated Yumi, Sun Ri, and Hyun-woo. She defeated the four of us alone. Do you feel good? Don't you want to see how Park Hai-sun avenges us?" The competition rules only state that dead students are not allowed to interact with non-dead students. They don't say that spectators are not allowed. Sun Ri, don't you want to see? Think about how you were defeated by her. Cha Minjun, think about how you were defeated by Yi Qian. Did you really bow down to her? I won't. Even if I, Lu Ena, am defeated by Yi Qian tonight, I will never admit that I'm worse than her. We are Korean military students. I will never bow down to a military student from a poor country. I must see with my own eyes how she is defeated by a military student from our country. These provocative words finally made Li Shanli whisper, "Let's go and take a look. Don't say anything and watch secretly." The rules of the competition didn't say that you can't peek. However, on the other side, Li Xiang pinned a Korean student to the ground and ended the match. The signal source went out, and the referee announced that the Chinese side had won the match. When Kim Jong-un saw the score of 8-0 in front of the instructor, he didn't know how many hairs he had on his head were torn off by him. They lost. Korea lost. They lost in the hands of a student from a country they looked down on. Tonight, South Korea still did not win. What about the rest of the competition? Could they still win against the Chinese side when they were representing their country? At this moment, instructor Jin Zhong had some doubts. Li Jinyan was not surprised by the results. Yi Qian had defeated 4 of them by himself, while the rest of the students had defeated 4 of them together. Not bad. He was satisfied with the results. 2 Malaysian military personnel walked over hurriedly. One of them walked towards instructor Jin Zhong, while the other walked towards Li Jinyan. After whispering a few words, the instructors from the other countries saw the instructors from the other countries leaving with the Malaysian military personnel. The Chinese instructor was still all right. Although his footsteps were big, he was still calm. However, the Korean instructor's footsteps were hurried and messy. It was as if something big had happened. At this moment, the battle had reached its climax. Many instructors were staring at the military handsets, staring at the signal source that belonged to the students from their country. The Korean and Chinese instructors suddenly left with the Monfei military personnel. They couldn't help but raise their heads and look over. Chapter 3675. The instructors had set up a makeshift tent. It was empty all around, except for a tarpaulin on the roof. There was a long table in the tent, and on the table was a military laptop. The instructors from each country could see whether their own students had died in battle through the military laptop's combat system. At this time, the 2 instructors suddenly left. They were puzzled, but at the same time, they suspected that something might have happened to the students of the 2 countries. Did something happen? I don't know. Something might have happened. The Korean instructor was a little flustered. Did the Korean students violate the competition rules again? If that's the case, they must be severely punished. The competition rules must be followed unconditionally by the students of each country. If they really violated the competition rules, then this is the second time Korea has violated the competition rules. The instructors spoke one after another. With the help of the translator, They communicated with each other awkwardly. When they saw Jin Zhong in a hurry, they subconsciously thought that Korea had violated the competition rules again. They didn't think that it might be China who had violated the competition rules. The Thai instructor walked over to the military device that the instructor was looking at just now. After taking a look, he said in surprise, "The Chinese side has won. 8 students from the Korean island have died, and the Chinese side has not lost a single person." The translator beside him quickly translated in Thai. The Japanese instructor walked over in a few steps. When he saw the system's judgment, the Japanese instructor's expression was extremely solemn. China had won, and it was a beautiful victory. Japan had also lost 3 people, but they didn't maintain a 0 death like China. We should compete with the Chinese students. Only by competing with the Chinese students can we better understand the strength of China, the instructor muttered to himself. He didn't avoid the competition like Jin Zhong. Instead, he hoped to have a chance to compete with the Chinese students. China's overwhelming victory made the instructors of all countries talk about it. Soon, the Western countries and instructors also joined in the discussion. Now, it wasn't only the Japanese instructors who wanted their students to have a chance to compete with the Chinese students. Even the Western countries' instructors wanted to do so. Instructor Marcus David from West Point touched his chin lightly, indicating that he also wanted his students to have a chance to compete with the Chinese students. It was too shocking and unbelievable. The Korean team was not weak, but against the Chinese, it was like a battle between 2 adults. There was no chance of winning. It was really surprising. They had underestimated China and overestimated South Korea. However, since the winner and loser had already been decided, why hadn't the results been announced yet? Did something really happen? The Korean students violated the competition rules again? His guess was correct. The Korean student had once again violated the rules of the competition. However, it wasn't like Lu Ina, who had recklessly violated the rules. Instead, it was because they were in a frenzy and couldn't stop themselves from breaking the rules. Park Hae-sun, who was fighting against Yi Chien, did not even hear the referee's whistle. Even when Yi Chien loudly told him to stop the match, Park Hae-sun acted as if he did not hear it. His fist, which was accompanied by a strong wind, went straight for Yi Chien. Good. This is great. Hui-sun, hit him harder. More strength. Let her have a taste of how powerful your fists are. Let her know how powerful our Korean students are. Lu Ina, who was hiding in the dark, was so excited that she shook the tree branches with a rustling sound. This made Chae Min-jun and Jin Xianyu's faces tense. The match is over, but Hui-sun hasn't stopped. Should we go out and stop him? Jin Xianyu was very worried. He had heard the whistle and even heard Yi Chien loudly say, "The match is over," but Park Hae-sun was still going. Chapter 3676. Lu Ina, who was so excited that her eyes were shining, suddenly turned her head back and said in a sharp and stern voice, "Why do you have to pull him? The competition is over," but Park Hae-sun and Yi Chien fought before the competition started. The winner hasn't been decided yet. Why do you have to pull him? Kim Hyun-woo, stand still. You're not allowed to pull him. Do you hear me? This was a great opportunity to teach the Chinese student a lesson. If they didn't seize it now, would they have to wait until tomorrow? Tonight, they had to break the spirit of the Chinese student. They had to let every Chinese student see how powerful Park Hae-sun was. They had to make them feel afraid. The Chinese students had to be afraid of the Korean students. The whistle that was sharp enough to tear the night sky was blown for the second time. The 2 referees who were hiding in the dark rushed out. One of them blew the whistle, and the other shouted, "The competition is over. Both students, please stop the competition." The referee's voice was very loud. Although he was speaking in English, his accent was so heavy that even Yi Chien couldn't understand him. As for Park Hae-sun, even if he understood, he pretended not to. The whistle was blown for the 3rd time. 2 strong beams of light followed. One beam hit Park Hae-sun's face, and the other hit Yi Chien's face. The 2 of them were suddenly in the light, and the people around them could see them clearly. The sudden strong light shone on the 2 people who had adapted to the darkness. Their hands couldn't help but stop moving. Yi Qian dodged again and warned Park Hae-sun, "Korean student, our competition is over. Please stop attacking me. Thank you." Park Hae-sun squinted his eyes and pursed his lips. When his eyes adjusted to the strong light, he clenched his fist and swung it at Yi Qian's head again without any explanation. This time, the referee could see more clearly who made the move. Before this, they saw the Korean student attacking the Chinese student after the competition ended. They even dared to ignore the warning, which was a serious violation of the competition rules. The winner of the competition had been decided. If there were still students confronting each other, the referee only needed to blow the whistle, and the opposing students must immediately separate and end the competition. This was the competition rule, and students from all countries had to abide by it. Then, when the referee blew the whistle for the first time, Yi Qian stopped attacking. Park Hae-sun took the opportunity to counterattack. If Yi Qian hadn't reacted fast enough, his fist would have hit Yi Qian's face and broken Yi Qian's nose. The whistle had already been blown, and Park Hae-sun still took the opportunity to punch when he heard it. Yi Qian knew that Park Hae-sun was doing this on purpose. After dodging, he immediately told him that the competition was over. When the whistle blew for the second time, the hidden referee even ran over and yelled that the match was over. However, Park Hae-sun still turned a deaf ear to him. His attacks became fiercer and fiercer, forcing Yi Qian, who was just dodging, to defend herself. Yi Qian's eyes gradually turned cold as he defended, while thinking about how to teach the Korean students a lesson. However, before teaching them a lesson, he could not allow himself to violate the rules of the competition. How can I teach the Korean student a lesson without violating the competition rules? Yi Qian thought of his brother, Li Jinyan. He needed to let him know. Lu Ina shouted excitedly in such a situation, asking Park Hae-sun to teach Yi Qian a lesson. She seemed to have seen Yi Qian begging for mercy. She was so excited that her eyes lit up like fire. She wished she could rush up to him too. Chapter 3677. After 3 whistles, the referee ran out and lit up the military flashlight. The bright, snow-white light shone on both of them. After a short pause, Park Hae-sun launched another attack. Yi Qian's eyes flashed with a hint of ruthlessness. She was no longer purely defending. But before he attacked, Yi Qian shouted to the referee, "I need our instructor to come over. Please inform our instructor." "Thank you." Seeing that there was no way to stop the fight, the referee immediately contacted the workstation with his walkie-talkie. Then, the staff immediately called for the instructors from the 2 countries. Park Hae-sun seemed to have lost his mind. He did not say anything and only punched. Every time he punched, he used a lot of strength. As long as Yi Qian was punched, he would definitely be in so much pain that he would burst into tears. When Lu Ina heard Yi Qian say that he wanted the instructor to come over, she suddenly panicked. Her eyes flashed slightly. She suddenly pushed the leaves aside. Li Shanli and the other 2 did not react. She stepped on the dead branches and leaves and rushed out. "Aren't you very powerful? Why do you want the instructor to come over? If you are brave enough, why don't you directly communicate with our students?" In a moment of desperation, he spoke in Korean. As for Yi Qian, she couldn't understand a single word. Behind her, Chae Min-jun quietly withdrew his outstretched hand. Lu Ina was different from them. Her father was a commander, but what about them? They were from a very ordinary family. It was not enough to settle the consequences of their actions. Li Shanli stared at the 3 figures in front of her and then slowly looked at Yi Qian. After a while, she said softly, "We can say that this is a post-match exchange." Huaishuan spoke Korean, so Yi Qian did not understand. When the time comes, even if the instructor comes, we can stand up and explain. Fiona is very smart. She rushed out and said that this is an exchange. Huaishuan will definitely understand. Sure enough, Park Hae-sun, who understood, finally said, "Yi Qian, this is not a competition. It's an exchange." So it was an exchange. This was a good excuse. They didn't even need the instructor to show up, and they could openly spar with the Korean students. The Chinese students had already seen this scene. A few male students wanted to go out and stop them, but they were all stopped by Zhang Minghong. There's no need to go out. The referee already knows that the Korean students have violated the competition rules. Also look around. There are infrared cameras above. We don't need to go out. The cameras can also reconstruct the entire incident. Don't worry about whether Yi Qian can win against the Korean students. She's a legend in our University of Science and Technology. She's defeated several Sonda instructors. She's defending now, but once she attacks, the Korean students won't be able to resist at all. Everyone believed Zhang Minghong's words. On the other side, Yi Qian smirked. Communication? How do you want to communicate? A second ago, she was still smiling, but in the next second, her smile disappeared and a cold glint flashed in her eyes. She, who had been on the defensive, suddenly launched an attack and said in a cold voice, "Is this how you communicate?" She suddenly lifted one leg and kicked Park Hae-sun with a force that could sweep away thousands of soldiers and horses. Bang! An extremely heavy sound was heard. Park Hae-sun, who had been attacking fiercely just a moment ago, was kicked by Yi Qian with one leg. Park Hae-sun crashed into a tree, causing the tree to tremble. Yi Qian, who had steadied herself, looked at Luena. She was shrouded in light, like an unsheathed ancient sword in the extreme darkness. The snow-white light shone on her face as if it was covered with a layer of frost. "Luena, are you satisfied with this method of communication? I gave you face, but you didn't want it. You even wanted to find an excuse to escape punishment. Then, I'll fulfill your wish." Chapter 3678. Yi Qian's kick was absolutely domineering. It shocked Luena so much that she froze on the spot and did not come back to her senses for a long time. This kick was imposing and also kicked away the last wish of the Korean students to defeat the Chinese students. The Korean students who were secretly clenching their fists did not even dare to breathe loudly. Everyone's face was the same color, so pale that there was no trace of blood. The expression in their eyes was also the same. Under the deep shock, there was an unconcealable fear that could not be concealed. Park Hae-sun, he who was most likely to defeat the Chinese students, was kicked away by Yi Qian. Until now, he was still holding onto the trembling small tree. How could this be? How could this be? Why were they defeated by the Chinese students again and again? Why were they so easily defeated by the Chinese students again and again? They were obviously stronger than the Chinese students. Why did the Chinese students beat them again and again? How could this be? How could this be? The pale-faced Korean students clenched their fists so hard that they made cracking sounds, but they still could not figure out why. Park Hae-sun himself could not figure out why. The dull pain in his chest made him unable to straighten his back. It was too painful. It was so painful that sweat appeared on his forehead. It was so painful that his teeth could not help but tremble. Why was it so painful? Were his ribs broken? Were his internal organs injured as well? Park Hae-sun, who was drenched in cold sweat, pressed his chest tentatively to confirm whether his ribs were broken. He slowly pressed down, and only then did Park Hae-sun's tense heart slowly relax. Fortunately, his ribs were not broken. Park Hae-sun stopped bending and finally stood up. His standing up made the Korean students, who were clenching their fists so hard that they made cracking sounds. Their faces were so pale that their eyes had lost their luster. They could not help but straighten their backs that were unknowingly bent. Park Hae-sun stood up. Their country's students stood up. He was not defeated by the Chinese students. He could still stand up and continue. Tears suddenly gushed out of Li Shanli's eyes. She raised her hand and clenched her teeth tightly to prevent herself from crying out loud. Only low sobs came from her throat. Park Hae-sun, you can definitely defeat Yi Qian, right? She would definitely be able to defeat her, right? She was not the only one who felt this way. The eyes of the other Korean students were all moist. At this moment, the Korean students were very excited. Park Hae-sun, standing up, gave them hope again. The Chinese students were very calm. Even when Yi Qian sent the Korean student flying with a kick, they were not too surprised. This was because Zhang Minghong had said that Yi Qian could take on 5 people by himself. Therefore, kicking a Korean student down was not a big deal. They didn't know why the Korean students were so excited. After being kicked, 1 or 2 of them were so nervous that they looked like they were going to faint in the next second. This made them have to be careful. If they fainted, they could still help them out. When Park Hae-sun stood up, these people were so excited that they were trembling all over. Were they really not worried that Park Hae-sun would be kicked by Yi Qian again after he stood up? It was bad enough that he was kicked once, but did he want him to be kicked again? Could he bear to do that? Even the Chinese students couldn't bear to do that. They didn't know how the Korean students could bear to do that. On the surface, the Chinese student was very calm, but he was actually very nervous. You want to teach the Chinese students a lesson? Ha, 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 ha. Why don't you give it to us? Don't say anything. There will be more exciting things when he stands up. Watch carefully. Before Jiang Yang could finish speaking, he heard Tianqin exclaim softly, "The instructor is here." Chapter 36-79. The instructors from the 2 countries who accompanied the Monfei military personnel finally arrived. Park Hae-sun, the instructors are here. Luina seemed to have suddenly woken up and shouted at Park Hae-sun, who was standing up to catch his breath. The instructors will not give you another chance to attack. Quick, quick, hurry up and fight. Yi Qian really felt that the Korean students had pig-like teammates. They were not afraid of godlike opponents, but they were afraid of pig-like teammates. It was fine if she was shouting, but her voice was so weak. Was she shouting? She was probably discouraged. Park Hae-sun did not move. He wanted to continue, but he wanted to catch his breath before continuing. Jin Zhongzai, who had rushed over, happened to hear Luina's shouts. He was walking so fast that he sneezed and almost fell down. His footsteps quickened a lot, and the anxiety on his face was obvious. The referee went over and quickly explained what had just happened. When he talked about Jin Zhongzai, the instructor's face turned green and white. In the end, his face was so dark that it reflected the light. Luina, did she want the Korean students to lose the qualification to compete? Li Jinyan, who had already noticed the front, suddenly stopped and said calmly, "Then let them have a good exchange. We will go after they are done." Instructor Jean, what do you think? Exchange? Exchange? Huh, that's right. It could be said that they were exchanging. Jin Zhongzai's reaction was very fast. He immediately thought of how to let the Korean students continue to compete. The 2 referees were stunned for a moment, until the 2 instructors explained to them at the same time that this was just an exchange and not a violation of the rules. The 2 referees still did not react. How to explain to the referees was Jin Zhongzai's problem. Li Jinyan walked to Yi Qian's side and carefully looked at Yi Qian. Then, he stretched out his hand and adjusted Yi Qian's collar. He said calmly, "Next, it's time to have a good exchange. I will watch from the side. You have a good exchange with him. Don't hide anything." Okay. Yi Qian nodded with a smile on her face. She really didn't have enough fun with that kick just now, so she would have to enjoy the rest of the exchange. After explaining to the referee, Instructor Kim Jong-jae walked to Park Hae-sun's side and said in a low voice. His expression was very serious and gloomy. "Now play well. Nothing will happen." He still didn't know that his student couldn't even straighten his back after being kicked for a long time. Park Hae-sun, whose chest was no longer in so much pain, nodded his head lightly. From now on, he would be very careful when dealing with the Chinese students. He would not be as careless as before. At this moment, the Korean students were no longer holding each other's hands. Instead, they were holding each other's hands tightly. The Chinese students expressed their sympathy. Next up, well, there was no such thing as the most ruthless, only more ruthless. Next, Yi Qian will make you doubt your life. Park Hae-sun, who had placed his hopes on Yi Qian, swung his arms and looked coldly at him. At this moment, they were not in the forest. Instead, they walked out of the forest and came to a relatively open and flat area. Yi Qian, who had taken off his training uniform and was only wearing a fitness short-sleeve shirt, smiled and said, "Just now, You were the one who attacked. Now it's my turn. Please advise me. Park Hae-sun bent his back slightly. Then, he suddenly launched an attack. His fists and legs were already in a position where he looked like he was going to knock Yi Qian down with one move. His attack made Yi Qian's lips curl into an even more cruel and cold smile. He took a step back with his left leg. Just as Park Hae-sun's leg was about to kick him, Yi Qian raised his leg at lightning speed and kicked back with his own leg. Chapter 3680. They're fighting. This was a real fight. The calm Chinese students secretly clenched their fists, then gently released them. They quickly glanced at the Korean students and saw that their eyes were shining, as if Park Hae-sun would definitely win. There were also a few people, especially the female student who transliterated Lu Ina. She even glanced at the Chinese students provocatively. Indeed, the ignorant were fearless. Zhang Minghong raised his hand to cover his forehead, then leaned slightly to Jiang Yang beside him and said, "Do you think Park Hae-sun will be able to leave the arena alive?" His question made Jiang Yang's heart jump. He'll probably be able to leave the arena alive. This is different from the last time. Didn't Instructor Li just say that this is an exchange? He swallowed his saliva to finish his sentence. It was obvious that Jiang Yang was also very worried about whether Park Hae-sun would be able to leave the arena alive. After all, he had seen Yi Qian's brutality. Yi Qian's moves were not just for show. Once he made a move, it was a sure kill move. Even if he couldn't kill the opponent, he would at least cripple the opponent. Therefore, when she kicked back, Instructor Kim Jong-jo, who was finally able to force a smile on his face, was shocked. Stop! He could see how powerful this kick would be. He was so shocked that he shouted and rushed over. His shocked voice made the Korean students, who hadn't realized what was going on, a little confused. Luina turned her head and said to Li Shanli, "What does our instructor want? What does he want?" Before she could finish her sentence, Yi Qian kicked Park Hae-sun's knee fiercely at lightning speed. At that moment, Instructor Kim Jong-jo seemed to hear the sound of bones breaking. His knees went weak as he ran over. He staggered until his knees bent, and he almost fell. Park Hae-sun was kicked down by Yi Qian again. This time, he wasn't as lucky as before. After being kicked by Yi Qian, he immediately hugged his knee and screamed miserably. The sound was too tragic, causing Lu Ina to swallow the words, "What are you doing?" back in her throat. Her wrist was tightly gripped by Li Shanli beside her. Park Hae-sun's cries were so tragic that Lu Ina's body sprung up. She held Li Shanli's hand tightly and stuttered, Shanli. Park Hae-sun, what was he?" He was kicked down again by Yi Qian. He was kicked so hard that he could not stand up. He was kicked so hard that he screamed even louder. At this moment, Lu Ina's face was as pale as paper. Her eyes were wide open and filled with shock. They still couldn't beat the Chinese students. Even if they were to do it again, they would still lose to the Chinese students. How could this be? Didn't Dad say that their country was stronger and more powerful than China? But why do they always lose to the Chinese students? She didn't understand. She really didn't understand. Li Shanli was so shocked by the screams of his own students that his shoulders shrunk. Even if the two girls held each other's hands tightly, their fingertips were cold and there wasn't a trace of warmth. The male students reacted quickly. When they heard Park Hae-sun's screams that were different from before, they seemed to have realized something and ran towards him one by one. Instructor Kim Jong-jo was already squatting beside his country's students. His outstretched hand was trembling violently as he reached for Park Hae-sun's knees. Even his voice was trembling. "Hae-sun, let me see. Let me see." The Korean students had already surrounded him. When they saw Park Hae-sun's pale face and his trembling lips, they knew that something big had happened. Chapter 3681. Park Hae-sun, who was kicked down by Yi Qian again, could no longer endure the pain by holding onto a tree. Last time, he was in so much pain that small beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. This time, he was in so much pain that sweat came out layer by layer like rain hitting his face. Soon, even his collar was wet. Park Hae-sun, Park Hae-sun. The anxious Korean students gathered together and kept shouting. Park Hae-sun, who was in so much pain that his teeth were chattering, turned from a high-pitched scream to a low groan. Jin Jong, who was sweating profusely, was stroking Park Hae-sun painfully when the instructor reached out his hand. He said, "His joints are broken. I need a military doctor. I need a military doctor." Yes, 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 military doctor. We need a military doctor. The surrounding students reacted. A few male students ran toward the referee. They needed a military doctor. Their student was injured. They needed a military doctor. The referee and a Monfei military staff who had just come over had already contacted the accompanying military doctor to check how serious the problem was. In fact, it was very clear when they heard how loud the screams were. The Chinese students did not go over to join the fun. A group of 15 people surrounded Yi Qian. They all secretly smiled and secretly gave Yi Qian a thumbs up. As for Li Jinyan, he only said to Yi Qian, "Not bad, very beautiful. Not bad, not bad, not bad. Just one move, that's enough." Yi Qian, who was not afraid at all, smiled slightly. She did not want to fight with Park Hae-sun for a long time. Since he had the courage to take the initiative to provoke her, he should be prepared to bear the consequences. However, she still showed mercy at the moment when she was about to kick him. She did not really kick Park Hae-sun's kneecap, but the back of his knee. The military doctor arrived soon. After examination, it was temporarily diagnosed as a dislocation of the knee joint. Whether the bone was injured or not, it would be confirmed after a detailed examination. As long as it was a dislocation of the knee joint, it would not be a big problem. However, she was afraid that there would be a problem with the bone. Jin Jong, who was nervous, immediately arranged for an accompanying interpreter to accompany Park Hae-sun to the hospital. When everything was arranged and the injured student left, he was slightly relieved. However, when they turned their heads, they saw their own students glaring at the Chinese students fiercely. The Chinese students were standing neatly behind their instructors, facing the Korean students calmly. Looking at their own country's students, they didn't have a formation, nor did they have any military discipline. Compared to the Chinese students, they couldn't even compare to the most basic things. Jin Jong's eyes flashed with anger as he yelled at the instructor, "Stand still for me. Quick!" "Instructor, they injured Park Hae-sun. We must make them apologize to him." "That's right, they must apologize. Park Hae-sun can't continue competing because of them. Instructor Kim, we can't just let this go. Apologize. Apologize to us. They injured our students. Instructor Jean, we need to report this to the arbitration committee. They should be punished." At this time, the Korean students were all filled with righteous indignation. Their students had been beaten to the point of being hospitalized, but the Chinese students did not say anything. It was too angry. "All of you shut up." Instructor Jin Jong was even angrier. However, due to the presence of the Chinese students, no matter how angry he was, he had to lower his voice. He gritted his teeth and said, "You ignored the rules and made the decision to communicate with the Chinese students. Do you think the referee doesn't know? There are countless infrared cameras around you. The referee knows your every move. Luina, you, a dead student, tried to stop a non-dead student from the Chinese team. You alone made us deduct 10 points. Chapter 3682. Luina was also stunned. Deducting 10 points? She didn't do anything, yet she was deducted 10 points? After being stunned for a moment, Luina straightened her neck and asked stubbornly, "What about the Chinese team? Did they get any points deducted? They violated the rules, just like us. How many points were deducted? Is it more than us?" Instructor Jin Zhong's face darkened. "You still want to deduct points from the Chinese team? Tell me, which part of the Chinese team needs to deduct points? When did they violate the rules of the competition? You still want the Chinese team to deduct more points than us? Luina, you've already deducted 10 points from us for violating the rules. Do you still want us to lose the right to compete? You still want to deduct points from the Chinese team? If the Chinese team's instructor hadn't taken the initiative to say that it was an exchange of students, he wouldn't have been able to explain it to the Monfei military and the referee. He was also heartbroken that Park Hae-sun was injured and needed to be hospitalized. He also didn't like the ruthlessness of the Chinese team's students. What he didn't expect was that the Chinese team students were so strong that they dislocated Park Hae-sun's knee with one kick. It was too late to say anything now. It was better to think about how to explain it to the arbitration committee. You still want to deduct points from the Chinese team? They still needed to ask the Chinese team to hide the truth for the Korean team. As long as the Chinese team said that it was an exchange just now, the arbitration committee might not pursue Park Hae-sun's violation of the rules. The Korean team could only pant. They didn't want to lose the right to compete, so they couldn't let the Chinese team apologize to them this time. It was too infuriating. The Chinese team had clearly injured their students, but they couldn't let the Chinese team apologize in the end. Why? Instructor Jin Zhongzai's reprimand made Lu Ina even more unable to accept it. The Chinese team didn't deduct points, but only the Korean team? She was so agitated that she almost shouted, "Why can't the Chinese team deduct points? Why will we lose the right to compete? Why won't they apologize to us? If it wasn't for the Chinese team, there wouldn't be any problems at all. All of this was caused by the Chinese team. Why should we bear all the consequences? Deduct points from us? Why should our points be deducted? I don't believe that the Chinese team didn't deduct any points." Instructor Jin Zhongzai saw that she couldn't listen to his explanation at all, so he simply ignored Lu Ina and walked to the other Korean team members. Before he walked, he said, "Why should we only deduct points? You can ask yourself why you are doing this. Also, you can ask the referee if the Chinese side deducted any points." Sorry, the Chinese side didn't deduct any points. Tianqin, who was listening to Li Jingyan, said in her heart. She listened attentively and occasionally looked to the side. After 3 to 5 minutes, Tianqin nodded gently, indicating that she had memorized it. But she clearly remembered that Li Jingguan could speak Korean, and he spoke it quite well. Why was he asking her to translate his words now? She didn't voice her doubts, but Li Jingyan could tell. This is for the Korean students, not for their instructors. With that, he would only communicate with the Korean instructors and would not explain anything to the Korean students. When it was time to hide their identities, they had to hide their identities so that there would not be rumors of instructor Fong threatening the Korean island country. Tianqin understood. At this time, she had to listen to the instructor. She would do whatever the instructor told her to do. There is nothing wrong with listening to the instructor. Chapter 3683. By the way, tell her that our Chinese students have followed all the rules of the competition, so there will be no deduction of points. With a cold gaze, Li Jingyan glanced at the Korean female student who refused to give up and only wanted to win, but couldn't afford to lose. If she's still not convinced, come out and talk to Yijin again. Talk until she's convinced. There was no way to reason clearly, but what about fists? If fists could be used to reason clearly, then let's use fists. Lu Ina wouldn't dare to communicate with Yi Jian even if she had 10 guts. Li Jingyan then said to Yi Qian, who had become inconspicuous again, "Help Tianqin go over. If they have any questions, ask them to come out and talk to you one by one." This exchange was naturally not a verbal exchange, but an exchange of punches and kicks. She was very confident in herself, but what if the Korean students really wanted to talk to her one by one? 1 against 15. Whether she could win was another matter. Just fighting like this was very tiring. There was still a competition tomorrow. They won't dare to fight you one by one. Don't worry. Li Jingyan explained to Yi Qian. Also, do you want them to lose the right to compete? Yi Qian blinked. He had considered this before. But if they really lost the right to compete and could not crush them in the competition, it would be a pity. However, losing the right to compete would make the Korean students even more embarrassed. And it would not be just a small embarrassment, but an international embarrassment. What do you think? Yi Qian asked in a low voice. He was not sure. Do you want it or not? They won't give up until they reach the Yellow River. What do you think? What she got in return was an ambiguous answer from the handsome young instructor. However, Yi Jin understood what he meant immediately. I've already told Tianqin about it just now. Let's see if the students from Korea can tolerate it. If they can tolerate it, they will hold it in and continue to target you tomorrow, and you can continue to win against them. If they can't tolerate it, tonight's competition might be their last. Then, what exactly did you say to Tianqin that would cause the Korean students to be unable to continue the competition? Yi Qian narrowed his eyes slightly, wondering if he should add fuel to the fire later. Be careful. I'll leave Tianqin to you. Yes, I know. The two siblings whispered to each other for a while. Then Yi Qian left with a smile on his face to accompany Tianqin. The male students wanted to join in the crowd, but Li Jinyan raised his arm to stop them. Don't be nervous. Too many people will get in the way. Too many people in the way? The male students didn't quite understand, but they soon understood. Tianqin repeated the words that Li Jinyan had said to her. The faces of the Korean students were all flushed red, as though they had suffered a great humiliation. Tianqin, who had been paying attention to Han Daigu's expression as she spoke, knew that she would be lying if she said that she wasn't happy. At this moment, none of them could utter a single word. Their sullen faces were pleasing to the eye. There is a great risk in the exchange of martial arts. It's normal for you and I to be injured. Your student, Park Hae-sun, took the initiative to provoke our team. Our team tolerated it and defended normally without violating the competition rules. Our instructors took into account the friendship between the two countries and did not pursue the matter. But this student of yours... Tianqin looked at Lu Anna and said slowly, from the beginning, you instigated Park Hae-sun to teach our team a lesson, and Park Hae-sun was influenced to teach our team a lesson as well. It's clearly a competition, but you deliberately took revenge based on personal feelings. Don't you think you're in the wrong? Chapter 3684. Fortunately, Tianqin had a good memory. She could remember everything Li Jinyan said and translate it skillfully. Yi Qian, who was beside her, only needed to stand quietly and pay attention to his surroundings. However, he felt that she took a little too long to speak. Her words sounded like she was interrogating them and didn't sound like she was threatening them. Tianqin, who had followed the instructor's instructions, continued, "We can understand that you want to win. However, you didn't use your own strength to win the result you wanted to see. In the end, you acted like you were wronged. We can't understand that. Since you don't have the strength and can't afford to lose, why do you have to provoke our students again and again? Miss Luena, since you've always thought that your Korean students are stronger than our Chinese students, why can't you win against our Chinese students? Just now, Park Hae-sun was communicating with our student, Yi Qian. He came aggressively and directly drew his knife to stab Yi Qian in the neck. I want to ask, since it was an exchange, why did he stab Yi Qian in the neck? Li Jinyan had asked Tianqin to say these words. It was a very gentle question and didn't have any killing power. It was just to embarrass the Korean students present. When Yi Qian heard this, his eyes darkened slightly. When it was time to use it, one would regret not having enough knowledge. Language was very important. He could understand what Tianqin was saying at all. Tianqin, who was secretly adjusting her tone, spoke with a more serious expression. After breaking the rules, you didn't have the courage to admit your mistakes. In the end, you even tried to use Park Hae-sun's injury to make us apologize. This really shocked all of our Chinese students. To make the Korean students make another mistake and disqualify them from the competition. These words were far from enough. What she was going to say next was the main point. Tianqin gently clenched her fists. With her support by her side, she straightened her back. Her eyes gradually turned cold, and her voice became cold. We don't understand at all why, as soldiers of your country, you don't even have the courage to admit your mistakes. Instead, you want to push all the blame onto our Chinese students. What each of you did is really unbecoming of a soldier of your country. It makes us feel very ashamed. The last sentence was the main point. After Tianqin finished speaking, she immediately said the most important thing to Yi Qian. A light flashed in his dark eyes as he looked coldly at the Korean students. It was up to them to see if the Korean students could tolerate it. The one who couldn't tolerate it the most was probably Luina, who was approaching them. The first part of the speech only made the Korean students feel embarrassed, but the last part of the speech, "You don't have the strength of character that your country's soldiers should have," was so lethal that it made all the Korean students' faces change in anger. These words had stepped on the Korean students' sore spot. Even instructor Jin Jong-zai, who wanted to settle the matter peacefully, had a twisted expression on his face. He was actually despised by the Chinese students to this extent. Lu Ina, who had been called out by name, let all her emotions erupt at this moment. Instructor Kim Jong-zai, who was close by, did not even have time to react. Luina pulled out a dagger and stabbed at him. "Do you think you could be compared to Korea? Don't have the strength of a soldier? Today, I'll show you what the Korean soldiers are made of." "What are you trying to do? You can't win, so you want to kill us to silence us?" Screams rang out, and among them were the angry roars of the Chinese students. Li Shanli's voice was close to breaking. "Fiona!" He reacted quickly and pounced over. "What are you trying to do? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.